There is a man lying by a swimming pool in Rockford Hills, and the sun is already past noon, and he has not moved in 2 hours. He has a glass of whiskey balanced on his chest, not a small glass. He is watching the sky the way a person watches a wall, not looking for anything in particular, just occupying the direction in which the wall happens to be. The pool is a perfect rectangle of blue-green water that catches the afternoon light and throws it back in bright, shifting patterns across the concrete surround. It was installed by professionals who were paid very well to install it, and it has never been used for actual swimming. The man who owns it has a treadmill he also does not use, a home theatre he watches alone in the dark, a garage with 4 cars that he sometimes sits inside, but rarely drives further than the grocery store. His name is Michael DeSanta, though that is not the name he was born with. The house behind him is worth something between $3 and $4 million, depending on which real estate agent you ask and what the market is doing on a given Tuesday. 4 bedrooms, a bar, a pool table in a room nobody uses, a driveway long enough that the gate at the end of it feels like a statement. In Rockford Hills, everything is a statement. The houses, the cars in the driveways, the security cameras above the front doors, the careful arrangement of hedges that says to the street, the people who live here have solved certain problems. Come no further. Michael solved certain problems to get here. The cost of the solution is not listed in the real estate valuation. Somewhere inside the house, his wife is spending money. Not maliciously, that is important to understand, or at least it is something that Michael tells himself is important to understand on the days when he feels philosophically generous about it. Amanda DeSanta spends money the way the house fills with afternoon heat, continuously as a function of the conditions, without particular intention. She has a personal trainer who comes 3 times a week. She has a yoga instructor named Fabien Larouche who wears linen and uses French words in conversations about the body, and whom Michael has never managed to be in the same room with for longer than 4 minutes without wanting to say something he would have to account for later. She has accounts that Michael opens on his phone and then closes again because looking at the numbers does something with his face that he has decided he does not want to repeat in front of himself. They have been married for over 20 years. In that time, they have moved across several states, changed their last name, purchased this house, and accumulated a comprehensive inventory of things they do not say to each other directly. The marriage is not over. It is not good. It exists in the specific territory that lies between those 2 conditions, which is where a great many marriages spend most of their duration. Upstairs, behind a closed door that has not been opened today and possibly was not opened yesterday, his son Jimmy is playing video games. Jimmy DeSanta is in his early 20s. He has not developed a productive relationship with the concept of momentum. He sits. He smokes marijuana, the smell of which has become so embedded in the upper floor of the house that Michael has stopped noticing it separately from the general atmosphere of the closed rooms up there. He plays games for 8, 10, 12 hours at a stretch. He has schemes, occasionally, ideas that involve the word opportunity and that require a vehicle and sometimes his father's connections, and that end consistently in Michael extracting Jimmy from a situation that the scheme has produced. Jimmy is not malicious either. He is simply a young man who was given every advantage and found none of them sufficient to produce the forward motion that advantages are supposed to produce. His daughter is somewhere in the city chasing something. Tracy DeSanta wants to be famous in the way that Los Santos produces and encourages, not famous for a thing, not famous as a byproduct of skill or achievement, but famous as a destination, fame itself as the goal. She has auditions lined up in venues Michael does not have the address for and does not want to have. She makes connections at parties in houses he prefers not to think about. She ends up in situations that require his intervention, and neither of them discusses these interventions with any detail afterward, which suits both of them. Michael criticizes Jimmy for this, regularly and with conviction. Jimmy has no drive, no ambition, no productive orientation toward the world. Michael says these things to Dr. Friedlander and to Amanda, and occasionally to Jimmy directly, with the specific frustration of a man describing a genuine failure. He has apparently not noticed that he spends most of his own afternoons lying by a pool watching old Vinewood movies through the glass doors, with a glass of whiskey on his chest, not going anywhere. There is a word for that kind of oversight, and Friedlander has probably written it down. Dr. Isaiah Friedlander practices from a clinic on Pacific Bluffs with a direct view of the coastline that Michael has always found an irritating choice for a location that charges what the location charges. The waiting room has the quality of design that communicates care without requiring evidence of it. Friedlander himself is a man who presents as attentive while actually being primarily occupied with the architecture of his own advancement. He has a website where he calls himself a secular Buddhist and a keen model boat enthusiast. He is billed as one of the most in-demand therapists in Los Santos, which is a claim that the evidence of Michael's experience does not fully support. They meet once a week. Michael talks. Friedlander writes things down. The writing things down is consistent, and the asking follow-up questions about the things written down is not. At some point early in their professional relationship, Friedlander prescribed Michael medication. The records of exactly what are not available, but the effects were specific and memorable. Michael cried without any trigger. He wet his pants at the dinner table. He fell asleep into his food. He howled in the middle of the night, a sound that the DeSanta family described with varying degrees of accuracy as a dog in distress. Something animal, a noise that did not have a clean category. Friedlander was informed of these effects. He reviewed the situation. He concluded he might have gotten the dosages wrong and took Michael off the medication. The howling stopped. The underlying problem continued uninterrupted. If you are settling in for the first time with this kind of content, slow, detailed, documentary storytelling designed to carry you towards sleep, now is a natural moment to subscribe. It takes less than a second, and it means you will hear the next story and the one after that. If you are already a regular here, thank you for coming back. What is actually wrong with Michael DeSanta is the kind of thing that does not respond to talking or medication or a pool that nobody swims in. It is the kind of problem that has no clean name in the therapeutic vocabulary because it is not a pathology. It is a fit, or the absence of one. Michael Townley, which is the name under which he was born and under which he spent the first 40-plus years of his life, is a bank robber. Not in any theatrical sense, in the working, professional, decades-long sense, a person who studies a target, designs the plan, manages the personnel, controls the variables, executes under pressure, and walks out clean. His success rate in this field was extraordinary. His FIB file, which was extensive before his apparent death in 2004, used the phrase "most wanted man in America" in a way that suggested it was not exaggerated. He ran heists across the northern United States for nearly 20 years, refined his approach with every job, and did not make the kind of errors that ended most people's careers in that profession. He gave all of that up. He made a deal. He paid a price for the deal that he does not fully inventory, even in the private hours when the insomnia has him wandering the neighborhood at 3 a.m, the hours when he walks the quiet streets of Rockford Hills or drives to the water and stands looking at it until something settles enough to go home. He cannot sleep more than 6 hours. This is consistent, not variable. The house is worth $4 million, and Michael DeSanta wakes up at 3 in the morning and walks around it in the dark. The insomnia has been with him since the first year in Los Santos. He wakes at 3 or sometimes 2:30 with the specific alertness of someone whose internal system has not received the signal that there is no longer a reason to be alert. His body still runs the old protocols, the pre-job readiness, the elevated attention, the processing of exits. The body does not know the career is over. The body is still preparing for something. He lies in the dark room until the lying is no longer sustainable, and then he gets up. Sometimes he walks the neighborhood. Rockford Hills at 3 in the morning is a specific kind of quiet, not empty, because Los Santos is never fully empty but closed. The security lights are on above the driveways. The gates are shut. The expensive cars sit in their positions like exhibits of purchasing power that nobody is currently examining. The only sound is his own footsteps, and occasionally the distant sound of the freeway, which this far into Rockford Hills is reduced to a low, continuous note that functions as texture rather than noise. Sometimes he drives to the coast and parks where you can see the ocean. The Pacific at 3 in the morning has a quality that he has never been able to describe adequately to anyone, including Friedlander, which might be why he has never tried to describe it to Friedlander, because the things that actually help Michael DeSanta are not things that he tends to discuss in the Pacific Bluffs office. The water settles something. He stands at the edge of it or sits in the car looking at it until the specific tightness in his chest that woke him has reduced to a manageable level, and then he drives home and lies back in the bed and manages the remaining hours until it is reasonable to be awake. 6 hours is the ceiling. It has been the ceiling for 9 years. Friedlander once noted this in a session and then wrote it down without asking a follow-up question. He wanted the house. He wanted the pool and the quiet and the Vinewood movies and the family in the correct rooms and the city where everything looked like everything he had been watching on screens since he was a boy in a trailer in a state nobody talks about. He wanted the American dream in the specific configuration that Solomon Richards' films had encoded in him since childhood. The large house, the afternoon leisure, the sense that the struggle was over and the reward had arrived. The struggle ended. The reward arrived. And Michael DeSanta has been lying next to it for 9 years, wondering why it feels like nothing. The answer, which he has not fully allowed himself to formulate, is that he is most alive at the precise moment the vault door opens. That there is a quality of aliveness in those seconds, the planning collapsed into action, every variable under control, the outcome determined by the precision of his own preparation that nothing else in his available experience has ever matched. Not the whiskey, not the movies, not the pool, not even the family on the occasions when the family is good, which is not as often as it should be. He is lying by the pool at 2 in the afternoon with warm whiskey on his chest and the understanding, not yet fully conscious, that he is not going to stay retired. And across the city, in a scrubland trailer park north of Los Santos, a man he thought was dead is watching the evening news with the attention of someone who has just heard something that changes everything they believed about the last 9 years. Start at the beginning. Start with the cold. North Yankton is the kind of place that does not appear on most people's lists of anywhere. It sits in the upper Midwest, close enough to the Canadian border that in the deepest months of winter, the two countries share a weather system and a quality of silence that seems to belong to neither of them specifically. The towns are small and spread apart along roads that ice over in November and sometimes do not clear until April. The landscape is flat and open in a way that does not offer shelter from anything, not the weather, not the view, not the awareness of how much empty distance there is between you and the nearest place that has more than one of anything. People who grow up in places like North Yankton develop a particular orientation toward the world. not pessimism exactly, not the grim endurance that outsiders project onto them, something more like the absence of certain expectations about ease. The cold is real and the distances are real, and you learn early that the gap between what you want and what you have is a thing you close yourself or you do not close. Nobody is coming to help you with it. The state does not have the resources and the towns do not have the infrastructure, and whatever federal attention exists is looking somewhere else. Michael Bryce Townley was born there in the mid-1960s. The exact year is in dispute. The gravestone in the Ludendorff cemetery, the one with his name on it which does not contain him, reads 1965. 3 people who knew him during the events of 2013 and who had no reason to defer to his official documents said he was 45 at the time. 45 in 2013 means 1968. The discrepancy is 3 years, which matters in terms of calculating timelines and does not matter in terms of the story. A man who has been living under a constructed identity for 9 years can be forgiven for imprecision about his own birth date. The original documentation has not been publicly accessible since 2004. What is documented, through his own conversations, through things he has said to his therapist and to Franklin and to others over the years, is the quality of the childhood. He grew up in a trailer, not the nostalgic version that certain media traditions have tried to redeem as a symbol of honest simplicity. The actual version, walls thin enough to tell you the weather before you looked outside, heating that worked inconsistently, space small enough that the other people in the house were always present whether or not you wanted them to be. The kind of place that does not feel temporary when you are inside it, even though everything about its construction insists it should. His father drank. This detail appears consistently in the available record, always in the same flat tone Michael uses when discussing things he has categorized long since and decided not to revisit. Not occasionally, not socially. The continuous daily drinking that is indistinguishable from the personality of the person doing it, that has become the main note in the chord of who that person is, so that everything else they might be exists around it and underneath it, but never quite separate from it. He also hit Michael, not every day, not with a schedule or a logic that could be anticipated and therefore navigated, just often enough that the possibility was always present in the room when his father was present. The body learns to read environments when it has to. It reads the quality of quiet differently when quiet might be the pause before something happens. Then his father left. The record of when and why is incomplete because Michael's mother appears to have made a decision, consciously or otherwise, not to provide a stable account. Different stories on different days. His father had skipped town. His father had been hit by a train. His father had joined the Navy. None of the stories agreed with each other, and Michael has said, in the flattest of tones, that he eventually stopped asking, which was probably the response his mother's inconsistency was designed to produce. The actual reason, whatever it was, went with his father. Michael carried the open question the way you carry something that has no natural place to put it, at angles, always slightly in the way. He was left with his mother and the trailer and the North Yankton winter and eventually football. He played quarterback, all state, which in a state the size of North Yankton means something specific. You are the most visible person in the most visible sport in a community small enough that visibility has real weight. His picture appeared in the local newspaper, not once but several times across a high school career that the available record describes as genuinely exceptional. People recognized him in public. Teachers who might not otherwise have paid attention, paid attention. For a stretch of years in his mid-teens, Michael Townley was somebody in the only context available to him. He was talented enough that professional football was not a fantasy, it was a calculation. The physical gifts were present. The football intelligence was present. the ability to read a field, to anticipate pressure, to make the decision before the situation forces it. What was not consistently present was the temperament that sustains a career through the organizational politics of a professional league. His anger was the problem. He has described it to Friedlander and elsewhere without particular elaboration, a temper that got him into situations his talent could not get him out of. On the field, it produced penalties and confrontations that undermined the work. Off the field, it produced consequences he could not fully trace afterward because the anger moved faster than the reasoning that would have prevented it. Injuries compounded the damage. His shoulder, his knee, the kind of physical accumulation that closes doors quietly, one limitation at a time, until one day you reach for something and the door is gone. By 19, he was done with football. North Yankton in the late 1970s or early 1980s, for a young man with no money and no forward direction and a temper that was costing him options, offered very little in the way of alternatives. He drifted toward crime the way water drifts toward the lowest available point, not because crime was the goal, but because it was where the gradient led when everything above it was blocked. Before he was 20 years old, he had been arrested twice. He mentioned this in a therapy session as a detail roughly as significant as a parking ticket, not because the arrests were not real, but because what they represented to him, in retrospect, was simply the early clumsy expression of something that would later become considerably more refined. The arrests were for things he has not specified in any available account. Petty, probably, the kind of offences that accumulate around a young man in a small town when the young man has no money and no direction and a quality of composure that reads, in certain contexts, as threat. Nothing that produced significant prison time, nothing that stuck. He moved through the system and came out the other side without the specific accumulation of experience that produces either a career criminal or a reformed one. What he was at 19 and 20 was undirected. The football that had given him an identity was gone. His father was gone and had been replaced only by a series of contradictory stories about where he had gone. His mother was present but operating in a way that prioritized her own survival over his development, which is not a judgment. Survival was the appropriate priority in the environment they were in, and she had done what the environment required. He had, in those early years, a quality that he would not have been able to identify at the time, but that becomes visible in retrospect, an ability to stay calm in situations that other people found destabilizing. In the small confrontations of petty crime, in the interactions with law enforcement that produced the 2 arrests, in the general friction of existing in a North Yankton town with nothing and no clear path to something, he did not panic. He assessed. He managed. He found the line of least resistance through situations that other people turned into crises. He did not know yet what this quality was worth. He was about to find out. The arrests did not produce a long sentence. He moved on. And in 1985, on a stretch of flat ground in the North Yankton scrubland that someone had decided was adequate to serve as a runway, he met a 20-year-old ex-military pilot who had his own reasons for operating outside official channels, and the combination of the 2 of them changed the shape of the following 20 years. Trevor Philips had a small operation going. He called it air freight, which was the most accurate general category for what he was doing and also the least accurate description of the specific character of many of the individual jobs. He had been running it since he arrived in North Yankton, an indeterminate period, possibly a year, possibly more. He had access to a single Beagle aircraft through an associate who allowed him to borrow it as needed and did not ask questions about the return condition. He had a stretch of packed dirt outside of town that functioned as a runway with appropriate generosity of definition. He was 20 years old, or thereabouts, recently discharged from the Canadian Air Force. The circumstances of that discharge have never been discussed publicly in any complete way by anyone with direct knowledge, and the fragments that exist do not suggest that either party came out of the situation with an improved reputation. He took jobs that required moving things quickly without paperwork. He asked relatively few questions. He was not sophisticated about vetting clients yet. He was operating on instinct and the acute physical skill of flying, and these were sufficient for the work he was doing. A job came through a contact he described as elderly. The elderly man needed cargo moved across the Canadian border. The specific nature of the cargo is unspecified in everything Trevor has ever said about it. He uses the phrase hot cargo in his account of the event, which covers a range of possibilities without being more precise. The payment was good enough. The arrangement was simple. One vehicle would arrive at the airstrip with the merchandise and Trevor would fly north. He was on the runway when he counted the dust trails on the road and got two where he had been told to expect one. The first vehicle came in fast. A young man jumped out running. Trevor has described him in a specific phrase that has survived all the years since. My age, just 20, kind of fat but strong underneath. The man was moving away from the car and looking over his shoulder in the way that people look over their shoulders when what is behind them is a problem that has not finished being a problem. Behind him, out of the second vehicle, was the elderly contact. He was climbing out with the urgency of someone who has had something taken and wants it back. He was pointing. He was making the situation clear to Trevor in the shouted, compressed language of an immediate crisis. Michael Townley had apparently carjacked the elderly man on the road to the airstrip. Whether this was spontaneous, a decision made in the moment when Michael saw the man and the car and the opportunity, or whether it was calculated, is not clear from Trevor's account, which focuses on the outcome rather than the process. What is clear is that Michael had the cargo or access to what had been carrying the cargo, and the elderly man was attempting to communicate this to Trevor. What followed involved Trevor, a flare and a head, in a sequence that Trevor describes obliquely and that subsequent events confirmed ended the immediate threat from the elderly contact. There was also a body to be dealt with and a plane that never smelled the same again after it was used to deal with it. These are the facts that Trevor has shared over the years in various conversations, with the specific detachment of someone recounting a logistical challenge rather than something morally freighted. When the situation had resolved itself, the two young men stood on the airstrip and looked at each other across whatever had just happened. They both immediately vomited. Trevor has told this story more than once. He tells it with warmth, consistently, the same way. The vomiting detail always present, always delivered as though it is the most important part. And in the way that a story reveals what the teller values, it probably is. They had just done something together that crossed a significant threshold, and they had both had the same physical response to crossing it, and that shared response made the other person real in a specific way. They were not strangers who had witnessed the same event. They were two people who had done the same thing and felt the same way about having done it, standing close enough to see each other's faces. Trevor had no partner in 1985. He had associates, contacts, the borrowed plane, a network of jobs that was beginning to establish itself, but that lacked the structural complement to his own particular quality, the ground-side planning, the logistical intelligence, the calm in situations where calm was not the default response. He was exceptionally capable of the things he was capable of. What he could not provide himself was the other kind of capability. Michael had no direction. He had a criminal instinct that the previous few years had begun to develop but had not yet given a productive outlet. And he had, visibly even on the runway in North Yankton in 1985, something Trevor recognized as immediately useful. He had not panicked. Through the carjacking and the pursuit and the confrontation at the airstrip and the resolution of the confrontation, he had stayed in control of himself in a way that was specific and observable. They started working together. Small at first. Jobs that did not have a clean name, things that involved Trevor's air access and Michael's emerging logistical capacity and a shared willingness to operate outside the frameworks that governed how most people organized their professional lives. The money was not large, the jobs were not sophisticated. They were learning what the combination of their respective capabilities could produce. Michael had been watching Vinewood movies since childhood, Solomon Richards films specifically. He had memorized them. He started quoting them in operational situations in the specific way that people deploy a known phrase when they need something to lean against, not for humor, not for performance, but for the stability of a familiar register when the situation is pushing toward unfamiliar territory. He would reach for a line the way some people reach for a breath. Trevor found this baffling. He also, over time, came to recognize it as Michael's tell, the signal that he was in a situation that required more than his ordinary composure and was finding it. By the late 1980s, they had evolved from moving cargo to robbing banks. The step between those two categories is not as large as it sounds when you approach it from the direction they were approaching it from. The escalation to bank robbery was not dramatic when it happened. It felt like a natural extension of what they were already doing, which is how most escalations feel when they are occurring. Michael planned the first bank job the way he would plan every subsequent one, by gathering information, working through the variables, building the approach from the exit backward. Where do we need to be when this is over? What do we need to have done to get there? What might prevent us from getting there? And what is the response to each of those things? He had been doing a version of this analysis on every job since the North Yankton airstrip, and the refinement that comes from repetition was already visible in the quality of the work. The first bank was in 1988, on the outskirts of Carson City. The target was a small franchise branch, nothing with federal security infrastructure, nothing that required specialized equipment, a manageable first attempt for people with no specific bank robbery experience. The take was somewhere between $10,000 and $100,000, depending on which account you accept, and the discrepancy is large enough to suggest either that different people had access to different information or that the number was never precisely confirmed in conversations that have since become part of the record. What all accounts agree on, they were in under 4 minutes and nobody was hurt. For Michael, the Carson City job was less about the money than about the confirmation. He had suspected, on the basis of the smaller jobs preceding it, that he had a specific kind of intelligence for this work. The bank job made it concrete. He had planned for 12 distinct variables, and 7 of them had appeared in some form during the execution, and he had managed all 7 within the parameters he had pre-built. The planning held. The execution tracked the planning. They walked out. He was 23 years old and good at something. The following years were productive in the way that early careers are productive when a person finds their actual domain. Michael and Trevor worked across the Midwest, different states, different target types, moving frequently enough that no single jurisdiction accumulated enough contact with them to build a pattern. The takes varied. Some jobs yielded more than expected, some less. What was consistent was the method. Michael's planning, Trevor's execution, and a discipline that distinguished their work from most of their competition in a field where the failure rate was high. They were, by Michael's own description, always broke. The money came in and went out. Running an itinerant criminal operation in the pre-digital era required constant expenditure, vehicles, documentation, the ongoing cost of not being findable, the crew cuts that grew as the jobs became too large for two people to manage without additional hands. They lived in motels and borrowed apartments and a series of arrangements that were functional and temporary and never comfortable. Lester Crest appeared at some point in the late 1980s or the first years of the 1990s. The specific circumstances of the introduction are not clearly documented. What is documented is the impact. Lester uses a cane. He has physical disabilities that make him unsuitable for any role in the field, and that he navigates with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who made peace with his physical situation years ago and redirected everything into what the body can actually provide. What his body can provide is a level of analytical intelligence specifically applied to criminal logistics that Michael had not encountered before and would not encounter again in any comparable form. Lester could model a heist as an information problem. He could identify every person who would be in every location at every time within the operational window, calculate the security response times at the relevant frequencies, map the exit routes against the likely interdiction patterns, and produce a document at the end of this process that turned a plan from a sequence of intentions into a sequence of actions with known probabilities attached to each. He charged for this. He charged well. Michael recognized immediately that the charge was worth it. Trevor tolerated Lester because the jobs worked when Lester was involved, which was the basis of a professional relationship, even if it was not the basis of a friendship. The crew that formed around Michael, Trevor, and Lester changed over time. Members joined for specific jobs and departed. Some were arrested. One found religion. Lester mentioned this once in passing, with the specific tone of someone who has classified the event correctly and moved on from it. The names have not all survived into accessible record. What was building through all of this was a reputation. In the circuits where this kind of reputation circulates, Michael Townley's name was developing a specific character, a planner who prized clean exits over large takes, who showed unusual consideration for people caught in his jobs, who managed his crews with a discipline that was rare in a field where impulsiveness was the norm. He did not enjoy hurting people. This was not necessarily a moral statement. He has never made it as one, but it was a consistent operational preference that shaped the specific quality of his work. He was most himself in those operational minutes. The quality of presence he brought to a job was different from the quality of presence he brought to anything else. He has described this indirectly in conversations with Friedlander that were not designed to be revealing, but that are, when read carefully, almost entirely about a man who has found his gift and then been forced to stop using it. What was specific about the gift? It was not courage exactly. Courage is the management of fear. Michael did not have to manage fear in operational situations in the way that most people have to manage it, because fear requires the same neural resources that he was deploying for planning, and those resources were fully occupied. There was simply no space left for the fear to operate in. What he had instead was clarity. The more variables in play, the more that was occurring around him, the more that could go wrong, the clearer his thinking became. Banks and people and weapons and time windows all resolved into a sequence of decisions, each with a correct answer, and his job was to find the correct answer at the speed required. He was good at this the way some people are good at mathematics, not by effort but by a quality of mind that made what was difficult for other people feel natural. He was also, and this is the detail that separated his work from most of his competition in that field, patient. He could hold a plan in suspension for months, refining it, adding contingencies, waiting for the right conditions. Most people who robbed banks were impatient. Impatience was the most common cause of failure in the field. The job that started before the planning was complete, the timeline that was compressed by financial pressure, the variable that wasn't planned for because planning took longer than the available appetite for planning. Michael could wait. He had been waiting his entire life for things he wanted, and he had gotten very good at it. He was 23 in 1988. He was approaching 30 as the 1990s opened, and somewhere in the early part of that decade, on a night in a strip club in a city that is not on record, his life changed in the direction of someone he had not planned for. She was working under the name Crystal when Michael first saw her. The strip club was somewhere in the early 1990s, in a city that is not precisely identified in anything Trevor has said about it. He has mentioned the event more than once, but with a focus on the dynamic rather than the geography. Michael and Trevor were there with a third person, an associate, someone whose name has not survived into the accessible record with any clarity, who is present in the story only as a shape, a third man at a table, an alternative option, a person who initially drew Amanda's attention before Michael did. Amanda, whose real name is Amanda and always was, the stage name something worn for the work and not otherwise, was good at what she did. The skill in that environment is not what people outside it tend to assume. It is social intelligence of a specific kind. Reading a room, reading the individuals in it, understanding what each person in a given moment needs from the interaction and providing exactly that. Amanda has always had this quality. It has expressed itself differently in different phases of her life, as a performer, as a wife in a complex social environment, as the primary social navigator of a family that contained Michael and the particular diplomatic demands that created, but it has never gone away. On that evening, she came on to Michael. The how of it is not detailed anywhere. Michael has not described the courtship in any available conversation, and Trevor's account focuses on the outcome rather than the mechanism. What the outcome itself tells you is something. Michael, when he wants something, is patient with it. He is methodical. He is willing to wait for the conditions to be right and willing to work to produce those conditions when they are not naturally present. Whether he deployed these qualities consciously in the early stages of his relationship with Amanda, or whether they simply expressed themselves because they are how he operates, the result was the same. She came on to Michael. They married. She took his name. She moved with the crew as the crew moved. Amanda was not naive about his work. She had not entered the situation without a clear view of what it entailed. She had been in certain environments long enough to understand the texture of a life organized around activities that law enforcement was interested in stopping, and she had made a calculation about the available options that landed where it landed. She and Michael were the same in certain ways. They had both made peace with the gap between the life that is officially endorsed and the life that is actually possible for people who start from where they started, and they had both chosen the latter. Their daughter, Tracy, was born in 1991. Their son, Jimmy, came in 1993. Having children modified Michael in the specific way that having children modifies people who take them seriously. It amplified what was already present rather than changing what was fundamentally there. He had always been calculated about risk. After Tracy, the calculation changed. What it meant to take a risk that did not pay off now included consequences that extended beyond his own survival. He began applying more rigorous criteria to what jobs were worth doing, what variables were acceptable, what outcome of a failed job was survivable for the family. Trevor thought Michael was going soft. He has said this in various conversations over the years, with the consistent implication that softness was a flaw in the material. He was wrong in the characterization and not entirely wrong about the change. Michael was not soft. He was operating with a different set of stakes, and the recalibration showed in the work. But Trevor loved the children. He showed up the way he shows up everywhere, without announcement, filling available space, consuming food, generating an atmosphere that could not be ignored. He sat with Tracy and Jimmy and was, in the specific context of children who did not yet know enough to be frightened of him, something between an uncle and a force of nature. He said things in front of them that made Michael's face change in a way Trevor found entertaining. He left money on the counter. He left as suddenly as he had arrived. In 1993, while sitting with 2-year-old Tracy on his knee, Trevor made himself a promise. He has mentioned this promise in conversations over the years, in the tone of a man describing a commitment he made in full seriousness and intends to keep. If anyone ever harmed her, he would strip the skin off them, not metaphorically. That was the commitment, in the language Trevor uses for commitments of that depth. Jimmy, a few years younger, also received a version of Trevor's particular attachment. By the time Jimmy was 12, Trevor noted with something that sounded like genuine surprise. The boy had already accurately assessed the nature of the lifestyle, the needles, the guns, the beer cans, the general character of Trevor's arrangements, and understood what it meant. Trevor found this perceptive. Michael found it alarming. Brad Snyder arrived at some point in the latter part of the 1990s. He had attached himself to Trevor through channels that are not fully documented. Trevor liked him. Brad was honest about what he was in the specific way that appeals to Trevor, who finds constructed versions of the self, the performing of better qualities for public benefit, personally offensive. Brad did not perform. He was what he was comprehensively, without apology. Lester Crest described Brad as the shit part of the team, lazy, forgetful, mean, and stupid. This assessment has not been publicly disputed by anyone who knew Brad. Michael disliked him from the beginning. Not the performed dislike of someone establishing a power dynamic, but the genuine instinctive dislike of a person who has been reading people in operational environments for 20 years and reads this one as a variable that will eventually cause a problem. He could not make the case to Trevor in terms Trevor would hear. Brad was Trevor's friend, and Trevor's loyalty ran deep enough that evidence against the friend registered differently than it would have registered about anyone else. At some point, Brad suggested to Trevor that they cut Michael out, run the operations with just the two of them. The split would be cleaner, the cut larger, the arrangement simpler. Trevor refused. He has given no extended explanation of the refusal in any accessible conversation. What is available is the fact of it. Trevor, who is not a man who maintains loyalty as an abstract principle, maintained it specifically and completely in Michael's case, even when someone he trusted was making a reasonable financial argument for ending it. Whatever Michael had been to him since that airstrip in 1985 was worth more than the recalculated split. Michael did not know about the suggestion, and whether knowing would have changed anything about what he was already beginning to plan is genuinely unclear, because by the early 2000s, Michael Townley was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the work he could still do. What he could no longer sustain was the mode of life the work required, the movement, the documents, the thin walls in motels, the accumulated vigilance of a person who cannot relax, because relaxing in the wrong moment in this particular profession is frequently the last thing a person does. He had been running since 1985. That is 19 years of moving, 19 years of false papers that needed updating every few years as faces changed and photographs aged, 19 years of leaving addresses rather than accumulating them, 19 years of jobs in which the best possible outcome was walking out with money and the knowledge that you had once again managed all the variables correctly, and the second best outcome was walking out with less money, and the outcomes after that declined rapidly through a range that ended in categories he preferred not to enumerate. The money he had made over those years was not small, the aggregate was significant, but it moved through the arrangements that kept it from being traceable, and the arrangements had costs, and Norton's payments had costs, and the family had costs, and the lifestyle had costs. He had not arrived at a number that felt like enough. He was not sure what enough looked like. He knew what it felt like in Solomon Richards's films, someone sitting by a pool without looking over their shoulder, someone watching a sunset without calculating the nearest exit. He had a wife and 2 children. He had been watching Tracy grow up in a series of places that were not home, in schools that she started and transferred out of, among friends she made and then lost when the crew moved on. He had watched Jimmy develop in an environment of instability that Michael kept meaning to address and kept deferring because there was always another job that needed planning. He had watched Amanda make the best of circumstances that were the direct product of choices he had made, and had never found a way to say this to her in the honest terms it deserved. The specific dream, the house, the warm city, the pool, the afternoons, had been with him since North Yankton. It had taken on the texture of a Solomon Richards film because Solomon Richards films were the template he had for what a good life looked like when it was over, not the struggle, the after, the quiet. He wanted the after, and he was willing to pay what it cost to get there. In 2004, a young FIB agent who wanted to advance his career and had a plan for doing so made contact with Michael Townley, and Michael Townley began to calculate whether the plan was something he could use. Dave Norton was not corrupt in the Hollywood sense of a man drowning in bribe money and running criminal enterprises through his badge. He was corrupt in the smaller and in some ways more comprehensively damaging sense of someone who had decided that his own advancement was a sufficient justification for what he was willing to do to achieve it. He was young, he was ambitious, he had access to the FIB's files on Michael Townley, which were extensive and which contained, among other things, intelligence about an upcoming job in Ludendorff, North Yankton, a cash storage facility, Michael's crew, a date. Norton reached out to Michael directly. He had come to this decision through a process that he probably characterized to himself as pragmatic rather than corrupt, a calibration of available options that produced the most efficient path to a desired outcome. The desired outcome was a career-defining event. Bringing down Michael Townley would provide that. Doing it the conventional way, surveillance, undercover work, evidence accumulation, arrest, trial, would take years and might not produce a conviction. Norton had identified a faster option. He proposed an arrangement. At the extraction point for the Ludendorff job, Norton would be positioned on high ground with a sniper rifle. He would shoot Trevor Philips, an individual who represented a genuine public threat and whose elimination Norton could support on professional grounds, separate from the arrangement. He would then shoot Michael, who would be wearing a bulletproof vest beneath his gear. Michael would go down. The shot would look fatal. Brad Snyder would be arrested in the chaos of the scene. Norton would receive official credit for ending the operations of the most dangerous heist crew in the northern United States. His file would record 2 permanent removals, 1 death, 1 arrest, and the associated career advancement. Michael would receive a new identity, the relocation of his family to Los Santos with funding to establish themselves there, ongoing protection through a monthly payment arrangement Norton would manage, and access to the money accumulated over his career. Michael thought it through. The assessment he made, and he has been thinking about the quality of that assessment, with the particular focus of someone who has had 9 years to evaluate it from the outside, was that the arrangement was structurally sound. Norton had as much to lose from a breach as Michael did. The deal was self-enforcing in the way that arrangements between parties with shared liability tend to be self-enforcing. The exit from his criminal career would be clean, documented, permanent. The family would be safe. He agreed. He told Amanda. He sat with her in whatever city they were in at the time and laid the structure of the plan out and watched her face as she listened. She was not immediately reassured. Amanda has a quality, she has always had it, of seeing the shape of a situation beneath its presented form, and the shape of this situation included variables that were not in Michael's control. She said so. She was skeptical in specific, practical terms, not in the vague, emotional terms of someone who objects without being able to say to what. Michael sold her on it anyway. One last job. After this, we stop. We go somewhere warm. We buy a house and the children grow up in a school that is not the 5th school in as many years, and we sit by a pool in the afternoon and watch movies, and we are done. He did not tell Trevor. He did not tell Brad. He has spent time in the 9 years since on the question of whether these omissions were necessary, whether telling Trevor would have produced a response that prevented the arrangement from ever happening, whether there was any version of the truth that could have been shared with either of them that ended differently. He has not arrived at a clean answer, which is probably accurate. There was no version of the truth that could have been told without destroying the plan, and the plan was the only exit available to him that he could see. The heist arrived. The crew moved into Ludendorff in the pre-dawn dark. 4 people, Michael, Trevor, Brad, and a local driver hired for the getaway. They had prepared the job the way Michael prepared every job, with the care of someone who plans as though the planning is the entire job and the execution is just the plan happening. The first deviation occurred before they reached the target. The guard at the front gate was shot. Trevor shot him because the guard was in the wrong position at the wrong moment, and Trevor's threshold for resolving such situations is both consistent and rapid. The sound of the shot carried into the pre-dawn quiet of Ludendorff, and people noticed. Inside the facility, another guard came up behind Michael, got hold of his balaclava, pulled it off. Michael's face was seen. Trevor shot that guard too. 12 North Yankton State Patrol officers formed a perimeter before they were back outside. The shootout was sustained. Their driver was killed during the pursuit. Michael took the wheel. He drove toward the extraction point he had arranged with Norton, the ambush point, which he had described to Trevor and Brad as the location of a waiting helicopter. There was no helicopter. There was a hill, and on the hill there was Dave Norton with a rifle and an arrangement that only Michael knew about. Their vehicle struck a train at a railroad crossing. The impact was significant. They came through it somehow. Michael has described this part of the event briefly, without detail, in a way that suggests the memory is not one he reaches for voluntarily. They were on foot after the crossing, moving toward the extraction point. Norton had Trevor in the scope. Brad walked into the line of fire. He was moving toward cover. He was moving toward Michael. He was moving in the direction that made sense from where he was standing, without knowing that the direction put him between a FIB sniper's rifle and the target that rifle was supposed to hit. The shot hit Brad. Trevor, untouched, ran. He assessed the situation with the speed that Trevor assesses things and reached the conclusion that staying was not viable and departed at a flat sprint toward the tree line. The pursuing officers could not catch him. He escaped into the North Yankton winter and then out of it, and then he was in Sandy Shores beginning the decade that would follow. Norton's second shot went into Michael's chest. The vest held. Michael went down in the snow, wounded by the impact if not by the bullet itself, and lay there while the situation moved through its stages around him. Brad was nearby. Conscious for a moment, he asked what was happening. Michael said something. The record of what does not exist Whatever it was, it did not include the full account of what was happening, because the full account included things that would not have helped Brad and could not be unsaid once said. What is worth noting about this moment is what Michael chose to do with it. He could have left. Norton was on the hill. The police were converging. The operational logic pointed away from Brad and toward the extraction point and the next stage of the plan. Michael stayed. He stayed in the snow next to the man he had never liked, the man who had suggested cutting him out, the man who was dying now in a North Yankton field because a FIB sniper had missed the correct target, and he did not leave. He could not give Brad the truth in those seconds, and he could not construct a lie that provided anything useful, so he said something that served as company rather than explanation. He was there when Brad died. Then he stood up, and Dave Norton's second shot hit him in the chest, and the vest held, and the plan moved to its next stage. Brad Snyder died in the snow outside Ludendorff, North Yankton, in the location where he and Michael had been standing when the plan fell apart. Norton took credit for everything. His file was updated. His career moved forward at the pace that career-defining events produce. Brad's body was placed in a coffin and put in the ground in the Ludendorff cemetery, in a grave marked with Michael Townley's name and a date that may have been Michael's actual birth year or may not have been. The stone was cut and put in place, and the grave looked like what it was supposed to look like. Over the following years, FIB trainees under Norton's direction wrote letters to Trevor Philips in Brad's name. The letters arrived from a prison address. They described a life inside, the days, the adjustment, the slow progress toward whatever version of acceptance is available in that context. They encouraged Trevor carefully to consider going straight. They were patient. They were well constructed. Trevor wrote back sometimes. He missed Brad. Michael was aware of the letters. He was aware of their construction and their purpose. He was not aware of a single one in which the truth was present. Los Santos received the De Santa family sometime around 2006 in the specific way that a city receives people who have come there under arrangements, quietly, without ceremony, with the understanding that certain questions about their past are not going to be productively engaged with. Norton had arranged the Rockford Hills property. It was large in the way that things in Rockford Hills are large, not the largest house on the street, but well above average in everything except age. 4 bedrooms, a home theatre, the pool, a garage sufficient for multiple vehicles. The neighbourhood was the kind of neighbourhood where the residents were generally occupied with their own financial security and social presentation enough that the neighbours were not a primary concern. The name on the documentation was De Santa. Michael Townley was buried in Ludendorff. The file was closed. The career was over. Michael paid Norton a 5-figure sum every month. The payments were the ongoing price of the arrangement, not a negotiating position, not something that would decrease over time as the situation normalized. Norton had built a career on the evidence of Michael Townley's death and Brad Snyder's arrest and Trevor Phillips's continued survival, and that career continued to require maintenance. Michael's false identity was part of that maintenance. The monthly payments were the mechanism. They left the De Santa finances consistently tighter than the Rockford Hills address suggested they should be. The family's deterioration happened gradually enough that any individual week looked like a bad week rather than a trend. The first significant event was Amanda discovering that Michael had been with a stripper. She did not respond with a single dramatic moment of confrontation. She responded with a quiet internal repositioning, a decision made, apparently, without explicit announcement, about the nature of the arrangement and what she was therefore free to do within it. She began spending. The personal trainer, the yoga sessions with Fabien Larouche, who came 3 times a week and who brought with him a quality of presence that Michael found comprehensively irritating without being able to articulate specifically why, beyond the general irritation of a man encountering someone whose entire presentation implies that the man's way of existing in his body is insufficient. The wardrobe, the parties, the credit accounts, she took lovers, the specific number and the specific people are not catalogued anywhere in what has been publicly discussed. But it is clear from the texture of what Michael says about his marriage in the 2013 period that the affairs were a known and ongoing element of the situation rather than a single discovered event. Michael drank. He watched Vinewood movies. He lay by the pool. He drove to the water late at night when the insomnia put him outside the house at 3 in the morning and stood looking at the ocean for periods of time that he has not specified but that seem, from the behaviour pattern, to be longer than a quick walk to clear his head. Tracy chased celebrity with a specific kind of desperation that Michael found difficult to look at directly, possibly because he recognized in it a version of something in himself. She needed to be perceived. She needed to be seen as significant in a context large enough to matter. She was not unintelligent. She was operating in Los Santos, which is a city that has elevated attention into a form of currency, and she had decided early that she wanted to be wealthy in that currency without having found a sustainable method for acquiring it. She went to auditions, she made connections at parties, she ended up in situations. Michael intervened in several of them in ways that neither of them discussed afterward with any clarity. Jimmy sat in his room. This is the version of Jimmy that lives in Michael's descriptions of his family. The gaming, the marijuana, the directionlessness. Michael deploys this description with the conviction of a man who is not rationalizing anything, who genuinely believes that his son's failure to develop forward momentum is a failure of the son's character rather than a reflection of anything else that has been true about the DeSanta household in the years they have all lived in it together. Michael also, on most days, lies by the pool and watches movies until the light changes and the whiskey runs out. He has apparently never connected these facts. Friedlander might have helped him make the connection. Friedlander chose not to, apparently, because making the connection would have concluded Michael's therapeutic process and therefore his billing relationship with Friedlander, and Friedlander had other uses for the material. He was writing a book. He had a radio program developing. He had, under the pseudonym Marquis de Santos, been using Michael's sessions as source material for content that was beginning to find an audience. The book was titled Sociopath: Inside the Mind of America's Most Deluded Criminals. It would eventually become a significant bestseller. The Marquis de Santos character in the book's later chapters is described as a middle-aged man in a large house who believes he has retired from a life of crime and who has constructed an elaborate internal narrative in which this retirement represents moral improvement. The book's argument is that the construction of the internal narrative is itself the crime, that someone who has done what he has done and frames it as retirement rather than hiding is performing a specific form of self-deception that Friedlander presents as clinically notable. Michael did not know about any of this yet. He would find out eventually. How he responded to finding out, whether he hunted Friedlander down or simply processed it as one more entry in the long ledger of things people had taken from him without asking, is not fully documented. What is documented is that by the end of the events of 2013, Friedlander had fled Los Santos, whether from foreknowledge of Michael's discovery or from some other calculation. He may have been found. He may not have been. The law on this point is ambiguous, which is appropriate for a man who spent 3 years professionally exploiting someone who was very good at resolving ambiguities permanently. He knew about the medication that had produced the howling, which had stopped. He knew about the insomnia, the 6-hour sleep cycle, the pre-dawn walks in a neighborhood that never fully quieted. He knew about the pool and the whiskey and the 9 years of getting through days that felt individually manageable and that collectively felt like a weight he could not identify because it did not have a name. And then, in 2013, a 25-year-old repo agent with a court order and no particular reason to be subtle came to reclaim a car from the DeSanta driveway, and Michael was already in the back seat waiting for him because he had been waiting for something, and this was the closest thing to something that had appeared in years. Franklin Clinton had been in the car repossession business for long enough to understand it completely, and to understand that complete understanding of it was not getting him anywhere. He had grown up in South Los Santos in circumstances that the city produces reliably and that the city does not particularly work to address. His father was gone before Franklin was old enough to form a memory of him. His mother died of a drug overdose. He was raised by his grandmother, a woman described in every available account as someone who took Franklin's welfare seriously and whose resources for doing so were limited by everything the neighborhood had decided about the people who lived in it. He had done the gang affiliation, not superficially, but with the commitment of someone who had understood, at the age it is understood, that the available structures for belonging in South Los Santos were the ones he was looking at, the families, the territory politics, the loyalty demands that came with membership and that shaped every other choice available to you once you had made that one. By 2013, he was 25, working for Simeon Yatarian's car dealership in a job he fully understood and that had a ceiling he could see from where he was standing, and that the ceiling was not high. Simeon ran a credit fraud operation through the dealership, sell luxury vehicles to customers who could not maintain the payments, collect the initial deposits, wait for the default, send a repo agent to recover the car, collect again. Franklin was the repo agent. He was good at it. He drove Lamar Davis to the jobs, located the vehicles, handled the situations that developed when the person whose car was being repossessed objected, and got the cars back to the lot. He was competent and efficient and going nowhere. Jimmy DeSanta had purchased an SUV from Simeon Yatarian. He had agreed to pay $5,000 per month in installments. He had defaulted, as Simeon's customers reliably did, as Simeon's business model anticipated. Franklin was sent to the DeSanta residence in Rockford Hills. He got into the property, located the SUV in the garage, and left in it. He was down the driveway and onto the street when the blanket in the back seat moved. Michael rose from under the blanket with a pistol and told Franklin, without any particular urgency, to continue driving to the dealership. He had been watching from inside the house when the repo agent arrived. He had seen the approach, assessed the likely timing, gotten into the SUV, covered himself, and waited. It had taken him approximately 4 minutes. He had not thought very hard about doing it. He had just done it, the way a person does things that they are naturally inclined toward when the opportunity presents itself after a long period of deprivation. The dealership conversation did not go well for Simeon. Michael made his position clear in terms that ended the professional relationship between Simeon and the DeSanta family, and did it without raising his voice, which was possibly more alarming to Simeon than raising his voice would have been. Franklin watched this happen. He had a quality that Michael recognized, not immediately, not in an explicit flash of recognition, but over the course of the events that followed, a attentiveness, a quickness of assessment that did not need to announce itself, a steadiness in situations where steadiness was not the obvious available response. These were the qualities that Michael had possessed since his early 20s, and that he had never been able to fully articulate even to himself, because they were the things he was, not the things he did. The next significant encounter began with Amanda's tennis coach, Kyle Chavis. Amanda had been seeing him in a way that went beyond the professional relationship implied by his role, and Michael found out about it through a conversation with Jimmy that Jimmy appeared to have been holding for some time, and released with the particular discomfort of someone depositing something that they could not carry anymore. Michael called Franklin. He called Franklin rather than anyone else because there was no one else to call. Lester was not the person for this kind of job. Trevor did not know he was alive yet, and the specific quality of what Michael was feeling required action rather than planning. He wanted to go to a house and destroy something. They went to what Michael believed was the tennis coach's girlfriend's property in a Rockford Hills adjacent neighborhood and destroyed it with considerable thoroughness. It was not the tennis coach's girlfriend's property. It belonged to Martin Madrazo, who was a cartel boss, who had not invited anyone to destroy anything of his, and who communicated the financial consequences of the situation through representatives who arrived quickly and were very specific. The debt was $2.5 million. Michael called Lester. Lester had a prerequisite. Before the Madrazo debt job, Michael needed to do something for him. There was a technology billionaire, Jay Norris, founder of a social network called Life Invader, whose upcoming product launch event Lester needed disrupted, not complicated disruption. Michael would infiltrate Life Invader's offices, locate the demo phone for the product reveal, swap out its battery for the explosive device Lester would supply, and trigger it remotely when Norris held it up during the live broadcast. Michael went to Life Invader. A programmer named Ricky Lukens mistook him for an IT technician and led him upstairs to fix a computer that was buried in malware and pop-up windows. Michael closed the pop-up windows. He ran the antivirus. He found the demo phone and made the substitution. He went home and watched Weasel News until the moment arrived, then called the number. The broadcast ended mid-sentence. Then Lester presented the Vangelico plan, a jewelry store in Rockford Hills, a specific security profile Lester had mapped in detail, a take that would cover the Madrazo debt. He needed a small, capable crew, and he needed Michael to lead the planning. Michael insisted on Franklin. He did not explain the insistence in any particular depth. He said there was a job, and Franklin would benefit from it. Franklin came, and over the several days of preparation that followed, the layout review, the security timing, the exit planning, Michael had the specific feeling of someone who has been doing something alone for years and has found, unexpectedly, a capable partner. He did not name the feeling. He just kept including Franklin in the work. On the day of the Vangelico heist, they went in. The Vangelico jewelry store job took approximately 90 seconds from entry to exit, which was 11 seconds faster than the best projection Lester had given them in the planning phase. The store occupied a corner position on a street in Rockford Hills that was lined with the kind of retail establishments that serve people for whom price is the last consideration. The windows displayed high-end watches and diamond pieces on white felt stands. The security was on the lighter end of what you would find at an institution. 2 guards on the floor at any given time during opening hours, a camera system that Lester had mapped in its entirety, a vault access protocol that was standard for the retail category. It was not a difficult target. Lester had found it by working backward from the Madrazo debt figure and identifying what was achievable geographically and logistically in the time window available. The approach used gas, canisters deployed at the entrance that cleared the retail floor of civilians in the first 15 seconds. Michael moved through the space with Franklin, working the display cases in the sequence Lester had specified, the highest value items first, the secondary cases on the exit path, nothing that required time they did not have. He operated the way he operated in every job that was going correctly, with a specific quality of calm that was not the absence of awareness, but the precise management of it. Everything he could control, he controlled. Everything he could not, he had already identified and built a response to. They were back on motorcycles in the specified window. The LSPD response was not slow. It arrived with the urgency that a jewelry store robbery in Rockford Hills produces. Multiple units, converging from the directions Lester had predicted, setting up the perimeter points that Lester had built the exit route to avoid. They moved through those gaps in the converging response. On the final block before they cleared the scene, a traffic cop was positioned in the road ahead. He was not a tactical problem. He was not armed in a way that changed the situation. He was, from an operational standpoint, a witness, a person who had a face and a trained eye for faces, and who would shortly be standing in a detective's office describing what he had seen. Michael grabbed him on the way past. Not violently, but with the total authority of someone who needs a thing to happen and makes it happen. He brought the man to the concrete with an efficiency that suggested long practice, leaned over him and said 6 words. He had been saying those 6 words since at least 1988, across more jobs than he could give a precise number to, in 3 different decades. The words came from a Solomon Richards film called Arthur Penny's Sanatorium, a 1977 production from the early part of Richards' career, back when Richards' Majestic was still finding its aesthetic and the budgets were barely enough to cover the cast. The specific scene, a character under pressure in an interrogation context, facing someone who has seen more than is useful. The character does not harm the witness. Instead, he reaches for a phrase that implies consequence without delivering it, a door being held open for the other person to walk through, and a quiet suggestion that walking through it is in their interest. "You forget 1,000 things every day, pal." He added the part about making sure this was one of them. He said it the same way every time, the same pace, the same tone, not threatening in the way that a raised voice is threatening, but in the way that a very still room is threatening when you are the only person in it who does not know why it is still. He had delivered this line to a teller in Carson City in 1988, and he had delivered it in the North Yankton cash depot in 2004, and he was delivering it now on a sidewalk outside Vangelico Fine Jewels, and he did not notice, because he never had, that the specific phrasing was unusual enough to be remembered. He had been saying it so long, it felt like his own voice. It had never occurred to him that anyone outside the rooms he said it in would ever have reason to hear it. The traffic cop told a reporter about the encounter later that day. Weasel News ran the story in the early evening news cycle. The reporter was thorough. The cop was a good witness, as traffic cops tend to be, trained in observation, accustomed to describing events in precise terms. He quoted the suspect directly. He used the phrase. He used it with the accurate delivery of someone who had no reason to embellish a quote that was already specific enough to be interesting. In Sandy Shores, 300 and something miles north of Los Santos, in a trailer park that smelled of motor oil and the particular industrial quality of the chemistry Trevor Philips Industries was running through the local supply chain, Trevor Philips was watching the evening news. This was routine. He consumed news the way he consumed most things, thoroughly and at volume. He watched Weasel News because it was on when he turned the television on, and because the programming schedule of the trailer park's available cable subscription did not offer many alternatives at this hour. He was watching with the low-level attention of someone who has not yet found a reason to pay high-level attention. The segment on the jewelry store robbery was the 3rd story in the local news block. They went to a field reporter who was standing outside the store on the Rockford Hills street with the crime scene tape visible behind her. Standard package, aftermath footage, police interview, eyewitness. The eyewitness was the traffic cop, who described the encounter with the armed suspect on the sidewalk during the robbery's exit phase. He quoted the suspect. Trevor's attention reorganized itself immediately. The low-level noise of someone watching television in a place he has been watching television for years collapsed into a specific, pointed, complete attention. He was looking at the screen. He was looking at it the way you look at something when you are trying to hold it still long enough to be certain you are seeing what you think you are seeing. He was certain very quickly. There is only one person who says those 6 words in that order, in that tone. There has only ever been one person. Trevor has been in the same rooms with that person when the words were said more times than he could count across 20 years of jobs in 3 decades, and the phrase is as specific and as identifying as a fingerprint. There is no alternative explanation that is more likely than the obvious one. He knows this immediately. He sits with it for a moment anyway, not out of doubt, but out of the weight of it. Michael Townley was alive. Trevor sent Wade Hebert to Los Santos to find him. Wade was loyal, thorough, slow, and well-intentioned, which is a combination of qualities that produces better results than the individual qualities would suggest. He was given the name Michael Townley and asked to find the person attached to it. Wade came back with 2 results, a man in his 80s in a care facility and a child in kindergarten at a Rockford Hills school. He had called the kindergarten and asked to speak with Michael Townley. The teacher had threatened to report the call to the police. Wade wanted Trevor to know that he had specified during this call that he was not a child molester. Trevor sent Wade back out, this time with better search parameters and more time and possibly a clearer briefing on what he was actually looking for. Wade found a different result. A property in Rockford Hills, a household registered under the name De Santa. A man of the right age, the right build, the right general configuration, whose digital footprint, what existed of it, had a specific quality of minimalism that did not fit the profile of an ordinary resident, but fit very precisely the profile of someone who had been living carefully for a long time. The name on the documents was Michael De Santa. The original name, recovered through channels that Ward did not have access to, but Trevor did through his own networks, was Michael Townley. Trevor drove to Los Santos. He had not planned for this. There was no contingency that he had been holding in reserve against the day that Michael turned out to be alive. He had spent 9 years operating on the information available to him. Brad in prison, Michael in a Ludendorff cemetery, and that information had shaped the 9 years in ways he had not fully accounted for because he had assumed the information was true. He had grieved in the way Trevor grieves, which does not look much like what that word implies, but is real in its own register. The Sandy Shores years had not been without purpose. He had built something. Trevor Philips Industries was not a joke that happened to have a company name. It was a real enterprise with real distribution, real revenue, real territory that had been contested and defended and expanded against the opposition of people who did not survive the contests. The airstrip operation had grown. He had more planes now, and better planes, and a supply chain for the aviation chemicals that was efficient in ways the initial operation was not. He had made himself, in Blaine County and the surrounding regions, a figure that was not easily displaced. He had done all of this alone. That was the relevant fact. He had done it with associates, employees, the occasional partner of necessity, but without the specific thing that the airstrip in 1985 had given him. A person of comparable capability who complemented what Trevor was rather than mirroring it. He had been the planner and the executor, both, in a way that worked, but that was not the same as having Michael Townley in the room doing the planning so that Trevor could focus entirely on the execution. He drove south on the highway toward Los Santos, with the Pacific becoming visible on the left, and the question of what he was going to do when he arrived not yet fully formed. The question had several components, not all of them compatible with each other. Some of what he was feeling was a form of relief he was not ready to name. Some of it was the other thing, which he was building toward naming but had not gotten there yet. He drove through the night. The city rose in front of him when he came over the final grade, and the lights were spread across the valley, and he did not stop until he was in Rockford Hills, at the gate of a house that cost more than anything he had ever built in the scrubland of Blaine County, belonging to a man who had been dead for 9 years. Trevor arrived at the DeSanta residence in Rockford Hills on an afternoon that had given no indication it was going to be historically significant for the people inside the house. The gate was not a serious obstacle. The house was large and had the quality that expensive houses develop when the people living in them are not fully inhabiting the space. A faint vacancy in the rooms that weren't currently being used, the particular quiet of an interior with too many square feet relative to the number of people occupying them. Michael was inside. Amanda was somewhere in the house. Jimmy was presumably upstairs in proximity to a screen. Tracy was absent, a detail that emerged from the first minutes of conversation. She was across the city auditioning for a reality competition program called Fame or Shame. The 9 years between Ludendorff and this moment existed in the room with both of them without either of them addressing it directly in those first minutes. Trevor was operating on what he knew, that Michael was alive, that Michael had been alive for 9 years, that the story he had believed about those 9 years was therefore constructed, and he was processing this information not by confronting it immediately, but by redirecting the energy of it toward the nearest available action. He wanted to go see Tracy perform. The Fame or Shame audition venue was a production facility on the city side that ran the kind of televised competition format that both produced and consumed the particular type of celebrity ambition Tracy had been developing since she was a teenager in a Rockford Hills high school. The host was a man named Laszlo, a media personality of long standing who had survived multiple evolutions of the entertainment landscape by being willing to occupy whatever position the audience currently needed filling. Tracy performed. She performed with the specific combination of genuine desire and insufficient preparation that characterizes early-stage performers, and it was honest in the way that honest performances are honest, without the polish that experience provides, but with an authenticity that was not manufactured. Trevor watched. What he felt watching her is not something he has described in any accessible account. The response it produced is fully documented. He went onto the stage during the performance, took the microphone from Laszlo's hand, and communicated in the direct vocabulary that Trevor uses for all communication, what he thought about the way Laszlo was conducting the proceedings and what would follow if the proceedings continued in the same way. Laszlo received this information and adjusted his behavior accordingly. They left. The reunion had officially occurred in the sense that they were in the same city and occupying the same general orbit, without any of the specific things that needed to be addressed having been addressed. Trevor was watching. Michael was managing, the way he managed everything, with enough engagement to appear fully present and enough control of the information flow to keep the dangerous questions from reaching the surface. He had been doing this for 9 years. He was very good at it, but the quality of Trevor's attention had always been different from other people's attention, and Michael had always known this, and managing Trevor was not the same as managing anyone else. Meanwhile, Dave Norton had been watching the Vangelico news with the specific alertness of someone who has a long-term arrangement to protect and has just seen an indication that the protected party is not, in fact, fully retired. He reached out. His superior, Steve Haynes, was navigating an internal FIB investigation that had created a need for operations without official footprints, work that could not be traced to the Bureau, that could not produce documentation that would appear in the investigation, and that required people with specific capabilities who were in a position where declining was not a real option. Michael was in that position. Norton reminded him of this in terms that were precise about what the alternative to cooperation looked like. Franklin was included because Michael included him. Trevor was included because his location had become known to Norton through the Ludendorff files, and because his capabilities were useful, and because the alternative Norton could offer Trevor involved a prison he was currently avoiding. 3 people with different kinds of motivation and a shared absence of practical choice began running missions for Steve Haynes. The missions were poorly explained and worse compensated. They involved intelligence work against the IAA, a rival domestic agency, logistics for operations that Haynes described in terms that consistently underrepresented how dangerous they were, and a quality of relationship with their employers that could accurately be described as institutional blackmail. Michael did the work because the arrangement with Norton was the architecture of his life in Los Santos, and he could not pull it down without bringing everything built on it down with it. Franklin did it because Michael asked, and because it was more interesting than anything Simeon Yatarian had offered. Trevor did it with the underlying energy of a person who is waiting for the right moment to address a larger problem. The specific operations ranged from facility infiltration to evidence destruction to the direct targeting of IAA assets that Haynes needed neutralized without bureau fingerprints. Some of them were straightforward by the standards of what the 3 of them were capable of, some were not. There was an operation against a convoy carrying a package that Haynes described inadequately and that turned out to be more protected than described. There was a series of missions in Paleto Bay that were preparatory to the larger bank job that would follow. There was an ongoing management of relationships with contacts who knew too much and who required management in the specific sense that word has in the environments Michael has always operated in. Michael did not complain about the work. He complained about the compensation and the explanation level, both of which were consistently insufficient. And he did this to Norton directly, in terms that Norton absorbed with the professionalism of someone who knows they hold the leverage and does not need to respond to grievances. But the work itself was not something Michael complained about. The work was the thing he was good at. The arrangement that produced it was the thing he objected to. The family came apart on a specific afternoon. Amanda's yoga instructor, Fabien Larouche, had been conducting sessions at the house with the regularity and the quiet authority that comes from being paid regularly to be somewhere. The sessions themselves were apparently legitimate, or at least not illegitimate in the specific ways Michael found illegitimate, but Fabien's general presence produced in Michael a sustained low-level friction that had been building for months. On the afternoon in question, several different pressures arrived in the same room at the same time. Jimmy said something, Amanda said something, Michael said something to Fabien that escalated past the territory of acceptable confrontation in a domestic space. The specifics depend on who in the family you ask, but the outcome is consistent across all accounts. Amanda and the children left. They did not leave explosively, with slammed doors and a clarity of grievance that at least locates the conflict. They left with the accumulated weight of a situation that had been developing for 9 years and had reached the point where leaving was the simplest available response to something that was not getting better. The house went quiet. Michael stood in it. He did not chase them because he does not chase things. It is not in his register, this particular form of urgent demonstration. He made a drink. He sat by the pool. He assessed the situation with the same methodical quality he brings to everything and arrived at the same conclusion he always arrives at in the middle hours of the afternoon, that the pool is still, that the whiskey is warm, and that there is nothing immediately useful to do about any of it. Devin Weston appeared around this period through the mechanism of the car jobs. Weston was the specific kind of billionaire that other billionaires describe with carefully chosen neutral language. He had made money in the way that money makes money at a certain scale, through the acquisition of assets, the restructuring of whatever obligations those assets carried, and the extraction of value from the restructuring. He had an interest in Merryweather Security, in Richard's Majestic Productions, in a series of real estate positions across Los Santos, and in an upcoming vehicle collection that he wanted assembled by people who were capable of assembling it quickly and without generating the kind of paperwork that legal acquisition would require. He offered, in exchange for the vehicle acquisition, an introduction to Solomon Richards. Michael stole the cars. He did not think very hard about this trade. The introduction to Solomon Richards was the only thing being offered that he actually wanted. Solomon Richards was 71 years old and had been making films at Backlot City since 1978, when he inherited Richards Majestic Productions from his father David Richards, and discovered over the course of the first year that he was better at running it than David had been. The Richards Majestic catalogue occupied a specific and well-defined position in the Vinewood landscape, not the prestige end, not the films that appeared at festivals and collected awards and were reviewed in the publications that took the position that cinema was the primary art form of the 20th century. The Richards Majestic films were science fiction and horror, with occasional detours into action and thriller, made on budgets that required ingenuity in place of money, and that produced consistently work that achieved what it intended to achieve. Solomon Richards had understood early that the key variable in film quality was not budget, it was clarity of intention. A film that knows what it is trying to do and does that thing well is a better film than a film with 10 times the budget that is confused about its own purposes. He had proven this 52 times in 4 decades. Michael had been watching these films since North Yankton. He could date his knowledge of specific Solomon Richards productions against the timeline of his own life with an accuracy that would have impressed any film critic. Which film he saw at what point, in which circumstance, what the light was like through the drive-in screen or the motel television when he encountered it. He had memorized dialogue from at least a dozen of them. He had been quoting Arthur Penny's Sanatorium during robberies since 1988 without, until recently, being in the same room as the man who wrote the line. He walked into Solomon Richards' office at Backlot City and shook hands with the person who had shaped more of his interior world than anyone except Amanda, and possibly more than Amanda in certain specific ways. Solomon's office was the room of a man who worked in it, not a man who occupied it for meetings. Papers in organized systems that were readable to him and opaque to anyone else. Memorabilia, not arranged for visitors to admire but placed where it meant something to the person sitting at the desk. Production photos from jobs that had cost him years. A view through the windows of the studio lot, the standing sets, the equipment houses, the physical infrastructure of 52 films. He recognized that Michael had actually watched the films. This sounds like it should be a low bar. It is not. Solomon Richards had been in the industry long enough to have a comprehensive understanding of how few people who worked adjacent to him had actually engaged with what he made as opposed to what it produced in commercial terms. Michael could quote him. Michael could identify films by single lines of dialogue. Michael had opinions about specific directorial choices in productions from the early 1980s that were not available in any critical literature Solomon was aware of, because the critical literature had not considered them worth analyzing. They talked about films for 20 minutes before either of them raised the reason for Michael's presence. Then Solomon explained the problem with Meltdown. The production had been in progress for 18 months. The script was strong, the strongest Solomon felt he had worked with in a decade. The budget was adequate. The crew he had assembled was experienced. The problem was concentrated in two people who should not have been problems: the lead actor, Milton McElroy, and McElroy's new agent, a man named Rocco Pelosi. Rocco Pelosi had a connection to the Ancelotti crime family and had recognized some years earlier that the entertainment industry offered a specific opportunity for someone in his position. The people who work in it are often unprotected by the kinds of structures that protect people in other industries, and the threat of disruption to a production, to a talent relationship, to a distribution arrangement could be converted into money by someone willing to make and follow through on specific kinds of pressure. He had inserted himself into McElroy's representation and had been extracting fees from Solomon that bore no relationship to the services provided since the production began. McElroy, for his part, had been manageable until Rocco was managing him, and was now increasingly unavailable for the scenes Solomon needed him for. The director, Anton Baudelaire, had suffered some form of breakdown. The specific clinical category was ambiguous, but the practical outcome was that he had left the set mid-shoot and was refusing to return under conditions that Rocco was controlling. Production was stopped. Michael said he would handle it. He found the location where Rocco, McElroy, and Anton were staying. He moved through the building without making enough noise to alert Rocco's security, which required the specific kind of patience and physical restraint that Michael had been developing since his early criminal career. He found Rocco. He fought him, without weapons, because Rocco disengaged immediately when a gun appeared, and this situation required persuasion rather than removal. The fight was not brief. Rocco was capable enough to make it a fight rather than a simple resolution. Michael won it with the efficiency of someone who has been in physical confrontations in high-stakes contexts since his early 20s and has had the experience refined by that repetition. The message was delivered. He took McElroy and Anton back to the studio in a helicopter, managing their resistance during the flight through the application of irregular altitude changes, a technique that translates "you have no options that are better than cooperation" into visceral terms. They cooperated. They returned to the set. They apologized. Solomon gave Michael the associate producer credit before the conversation about it had fully developed. He offered it the way he made most decisions, quickly on the basis of an assessment he had completed while something else was still being said. The weeks that followed were the best weeks Michael had spent in Los Santos. He had somewhere to be every morning. He had work that required all of the capabilities he had been developing since he was 20 years old, and that had nothing criminal in its description. He was involved in the production of something, contributing to its shape in the specific ways that a producer contributes, which are practical and organizational and require the same methodical attention to variables that a heist requires. He called Solomon on the phone on evenings when the production day was done. Solomon opened every call with a line from one of his films. Michael identified the film. They discussed the production, the casting decisions, the post-production schedule. Solomon talked about the films the way people talk about things they have been doing for 40 years and still find interesting. Then Rocco came back. He arrived at the studio with his associate Gianni and found Solomon alone in his office. The assault was physical and direct, revenge for Michael's previous visit, directed at the person Rocco had determined was the most accessible target. Michael arrived at the studio before significant damage was done. He found the situation, assessed it in the fraction of a second that assessment requires when the situation is clear, and resolved it. Rocco and Gianni left Backlot City in conditions that precluded future visits. The meltdown premiere was scheduled. It was around this time that Devin Weston activated the interest he held in Richard's Majestic Productions, which had been dormant since it was acquired, and which he had been keeping dormant precisely until it was useful. He held 50% of the company through a holding structure. Solomon's son held the other 50. Weston had been in quiet contact with Solomon's son about the son's interest in liquidating his share. What Weston wanted was simple: cancel Meltdown, declare the production incomplete, file an insurance claim on the production costs, use the insurance payout in combination with the studio land value, backlot city occupied real estate that the Los Santos development market would convert into condominiums at a significant profit with tax rebates, to generate more money than Meltdown would generate as a completed film. Solomon walked into the conversation with Weston carrying a physical film reel, a print of Meltdown. Weston's lawyer, Molly Schultz, took the reel from Solomon's hands. The reel was going offshore to a secure location. Without the print, the insurance claim on an incomplete production was straightforward. Michael left the building. He caught up with Molly Schultz at Los Santos International Airport. She ran from her vehicle toward a private jet that was waiting. She was moving fast, with purpose, with the reel in hand. She did not see the jet engine until it was immediately in front of her. She walked into it. Michael recovered the print from the concrete. He called Solomon. Solomon told him the film had been shot digitally. The reel he had brought into the meeting with Weston was a prop, a deliberate misdirection designed to give Weston a physical object to pursue, while the actual film remained safe in digital storage that Weston's people had never found. The reel had not contained Meltdown. The reel had been the thing they gave Weston to chase. Molly Schultz had died pursuing a fake film reel. Michael absorbed this for a moment. Solomon arranged the premiere. Trevor had been watching Michael the way Trevor watches things when he has a question about them that he has not yet decided to ask out loud. It was not obvious surveillance. It was the sustained background attention of someone who has lived with unresolved information long enough that the information has become a texture in his daily experience, always there, requiring slightly more energy to manage than it should, present even when he was not actively thinking about it. He had questions about Brad. He had questions about 2004. He had questions about the quality of Michael's reluctance when certain subjects came near the edge of conversation. He started pressing. Not confrontationally at first. He asked about Brad in the way that friends ask about shared acquaintances, as part of larger conversations embedded in other subjects, in the tones of ordinary inquiry. Michael handled these questions the way he handled every uncomfortable inquiry. He engaged enough to look cooperative, deflected at the points where engagement would require him to say something true and specific, and changed the direction of the conversation at the moments where the conversation was becoming dangerous. He had been managing this particular inquiry in various forms for 9 years. The practice showed his deflections were not detectable as deflections unless you already knew what they were deflecting. He stayed in the conversation without going into the territory the conversation was moving toward, but Trevor knew him. This is the detail that matters. Trevor has been in the same rooms with Michael since 1985. He has worked with him in situations that strip away the performed qualities and leave only what a person actually is. The microsecond decisions, the slight changes in breathing and eye focus that happen when something is being managed rather than responded to. He knew the specific quality of Michael's ease, and he knew the specific quality of Michael's control, and he knew that control looked like ease without being ease. Michael's ease, when the subject was Brad and 2004 and the North Yankton heist, was control. Trevor flew back to North Yankton. He drove to Ludendorff. The cemetery was a small one, the kind that small northern towns maintain, practical and plain, without the elaborate landscaping of the large urban cemeteries in places where there is more money. He found the grave. He found the stone with Michael Townley's name and the year and the standard language of epitaphs. He dug it up. He has the patience for physical tasks that require sustained effort when the tasks have a purpose he has committed to. He worked until he hit the coffin. He opened it. The man inside was not Michael Townley. Brad Snyder had been in that ground for 9 years, in a coffin that bore the name of the person he had been killed in place of, in a cemetery in a state that neither of them had been from, with no one who knew him aware that this was where he was. Michael had followed him to North Yankton. He had gotten there after Trevor arrived at the cemetery. He had been trying during the drive and during the walk through the cemetery grounds to find a form of words that could serve as a version of the truth that was survivable for all parties. He had not found one. There are situations in which the damage has already been done, and what remains is only the question of what acknowledging the damage looks like. Trevor confirmed what he already knew. The entire structure of the last 9 years, the deal with Norton, the shot in the snow, the vest under the gear, the grave with the wrong man in it, the 9 years of letters written by FIB trainees describing Brad's prison existence in careful, patient detail. Trevor saw all of it in the single moment of looking at the man in the coffin and recognizing him. He went very still. This is the specific register of Trevor's worst moments, not the loudness that characterizes his ordinary anger, not the violence that characterizes his moderate anger, but the specific silence that arrives when something has happened that is too large for any of the ordinary responses to scale to. He stood over the open coffin in a North Yankton cemetery and did not make a sound. He had grieved. That is what needs to be understood about what the silence meant. He had grieved Michael in the way that Trevor grieves things, which is not recognizable as grief from the outside. No ceremony, no acknowledging the loss directly, no conversation about it with anyone. He had simply operated for 9 years in the knowledge that Michael was gone and had built his life in Sandy Shores around the specific shape of that knowledge, the meth operation, the aviation work, the sustained feuds with the motorcycle clubs and the O'Neills and the Triads, all of it built in the space of what had been taken. And Michael had been in Rockford Hills the entire time. Michael had been watching Vinewood movies and lying by a pool and paying Dave Norton monthly and telling no one, and the letters from Brad had been coming from trainees in an FIB office, and Trevor had written back, and the person writing back had never existed, and for 9 years this had been the true account of the world, and Trevor had not known it. The implications of this settled into him in the North Yankton cold, standing over the open grave, with Michael visible at the edge of his peripheral vision. The implications were not complicated. They were the simplest thing in the world. Stated clearly by a dead man in a wrong coffin, Michael Townley had known and had chosen and had maintained the choice for 9 years, and the thing Trevor had believed about the 9 years was not the 9 years. Michael was there. They were looking at each other. They drew weapons. The standoff held for long enough that the next thing could arrive, which it did from an unexpected direction. The Los Santos Triads appeared. Wei Chung had been pursuing a business development initiative in Sandy Shores. He wanted access to Trevor's distribution networks and had been sending scouts to observe Trevor in advance of a proposed meeting. The scouts had watched Trevor and Michael together during the events surrounding the reunification in Los Santos and had drawn the most straightforward inference available to them about the nature of that relationship. When Trevor subsequently rejected Chung's proposal and destroyed the O'Neill family, Chung's intended alternative partners, Chung decided that Michael could serve as leverage. They had found the North Yankton location through Trevor's movements and had sent a team. The team arrived at the cemetery while 2 men with guns were standing on either side of an open grave containing a third man who had been in it for 9 years. Trevor assessed the situation and ran. Not because the alternative was unmanageable, but because the alternative had to wait. There was a larger accounting that this moment was not the right moment for. He departed with a speed that the North Yankton triads found instructive about the difficulty of catching him. He also, on the way out, damaged Michael's car. He did this with the specific intention of making Michael's immediate situation more difficult, because Trevor's feelings about what he had just confirmed required some form of expression in the available environment, and the available environment included Michael's car. Michael was captured. The triads transported him to a slaughterhouse in South Los Santos, where Chung's people held him as leverage and communicated through intermediaries to Trevor that the resolution of the business discussion was now time-sensitive. Franklin was informed of the location through Lester, who had been monitoring the situation with the particular alertness of someone who has been involved in complicated human arrangements long enough to recognize when they are approaching a critical point. He went to the slaughterhouse. He worked through the building's security. He found Michael and extracted him. Michael came home. Jimmy had been searching. He had driven around the city with the specific urgency of a young man who has not fully expressed how much he cares about his father and who has been confronted with a version of what losing access to him would actually mean. He found out Michael was home and came to the house. The conversation they had was not the cinematic version, not the apologies and revelations, and the decisive turn towards something better. It was two people in a room who were both aware that the situation had been serious, and who were responding to that awareness in the awkward, indirect way of people who have not yet found a clean language for the things they feel. It was real. It was better than the alternative. Michael worked on the family. He took Jimmy jet skiing. He attended Tracy's performances. He sat at the table for dinners. He was present in the house in a way he had not been for years, not performing presence, but actually providing it, with the consistency of someone who has decided this is what the next period requires. None of this resolved what the family was. It added something to it that had been missing, and behind all of it, the Union Depository was taking shape as a plan. The operations that Steve Haynes required from them were many, and the compensation for them was constructed to remind the crew of their position in the arrangement, which was not a position of leverage. The largest single operation in the Haynes period was the raid on the Humane Labs and Research Facility, a federally secured installation with a neurotoxin development program that Haynes needed disrupted for reasons he summarized with a vagueness that was clearly intentional. To fund the equipment required for a raid on a federal security installation, they needed capital they did not currently have on hand. Lester identified the Blaine County Savings Bank in Paleto Bay. The bank held deposits from the Blaine County Sheriff's Department and the local law enforcement apparatus that had been systematically extracting money from the cannabis and methamphetamine operations in the region and depositing it in the Paleto Bay institution under classifications that were technically on the books and practically unverifiable to anyone outside the arrangement. Trevor had been aware of this arrangement for years in the way that someone operating in the same economic environment tends to be aware of the systems they are adjacent to. The logic of taking this specific money had a symmetry to it that appealed in different ways to all three of them. The approach required a different category of gear than their previous work: stolen military body armor, military-grade weapons, equipment that put them in a substantially different tactical position than the Paleto Bay Police Department could quickly counter. They acquired what they needed. They moved on the bank. What followed on the main street of Paleto Bay was an engagement that the town would require some time and resources to recover from. They fought their way from the bank entrance to a point of extraction that was far enough north of the town that the immediate pursuit could not maintain. The law enforcement response from the entire northern region of San Andreas County materialized and was managed. They took the full take. They gave Haynes and Norton the largest portion of it, as the arrangement specified. Michael noted in a call to Lester afterward that this aspect of the arrangement was not something he intended to continue indefinitely. There was a secondary operation during this period, a Merriweather train in Raton Canyon. Trevor had identified it as carrying gold and artifacts through the canyon route, which was long and remote enough that an interdiction was feasible. Trevor derailed the train from a canyon bridge. Michael dove into the river below to retrieve the merchandise from the wreckage of what had gone in. Among the items recovered was a pre-Columbian Aztec fertility statuette. Michael pulled it from the water in the Raton Canyon ravine with the specific assessment of a man who has been calculating values in rapidly changing situations since 1985 and who recognized in the artifact the specific quality that Martin Madrazo would assign to it. He brought it up. He told Trevor it was the resolution to the Madrazo debt. Trevor said some things about the statuette that were critical of its aesthetic qualities and skeptical of Michael's assessment of its value. Michael was right. They met with Madrazo. The debt was cleared. The situation with the carjacked house was formally concluded. Michael experienced a brief moment of structural relief, one long-running liability resolved. Then Trevor attacked Madrazo. The specific thing Madrazo said that produced this response has not been specified in any version of the event that Trevor has described. What he said crossed a line in Trevor's ongoing assessment of what he would and would not accept from people he was meeting with, and Trevor responded as he responds to things that cross that line, which is immediately and comprehensively. He also, in the same motion, took Patricia Madrazo, who was present, who had been present through several previous meetings, and whose expression throughout those meetings had given Trevor a specific impression, out of the house. He did not harm her. Michael drove out of the Madrazo property at considerable speed because remaining accessible to the Madrazo organization was now a serious liability. They retreated to Sandy Shores. This was not voluntary. The alternative was staying in Los Santos in reach of a cartel boss who had resources and motivation and a staff that had handled situations of this kind before. The Sandy Shores exile lasted weeks. Michael hated Sandy Shores. He hated it in the specific, comprehensive way that a man hates a place when it represents the opposite of everything he spent 9 years building. He had left North Yankton, the cold, the scrubland, the flat, open distances, and he had bought a house in Rockford Hills with a pool and a home theatre and cars in the garage and a gate at the end of the driveway, and now he was in a trailer park in a desert town that was the Los Santos equivalent of North Yankton in terms of what it offered, which was nothing he wanted and everything he had been trying to leave behind. He communicated his feelings about this to Trevor, regularly and in detail. Trevor absorbed these communications with the specific quality of someone who chose Sandy Shores deliberately and who finds it entirely adequate for purposes that Michael does not share. The trailer was small. The air conditioning was the kind that creates the impression of cooling without fully committing to it. The nearest grocery store required a 40-minute round trip. Michael spent the days planning the Union Depository in his head, a project that was not yet real enough to work on in any concrete way, but that occupied his planning capacity the way water occupies available space, and that was more productive than thinking about the air conditioning. He called Lester. He reviewed what they knew about the depository. He thought about the approaches, the 2 ways in, the 2 ways out, the crew requirements, the timing variables. He had been thinking about large-scale federal targets since the early 2000s in a general way, the way a surgeon thinks about complex procedures they may one day be asked to perform. The Union Depository had always been in that category, technically possible, logistically extreme, requiring a level of preparation that most people in the field would not sustain. He was going to sustain it. He had nothing else to do in Sandy Shores, and the planning was something to do. Trevor, during this period, cooked for Patricia. He was careful about what she was eating and whether she was comfortable. He spoke to her with a consideration that people who know Trevor primarily through his public-facing behavior would not have predicted. Patricia was, by most available indicators, a woman who had been in a difficult situation for a long time and who experienced Trevor's Sandy Shores trailer as a complicated improvement on it. They had conversations. Trevor was, in these conversations, something approaching gentle. When the Madrazo situation resolved itself through negotiations that involved returning Patricia and arriving at terms that Madrazo accepted as sufficient for the situation to be closed, Trevor said goodbye to her. He was sad. He did not acknowledge that he was sad. He turned immediately toward the next thing, which was what Trevor does with feelings that he has not developed a language for. Michael returned to Los Santos without ceremony. The city looked the same. The Humane Labs raid was executed with the methodical preparation that Michael applied to every major operation: submarine approach to avoid aerial detection, military gear for the security infrastructure, an exit plan built around speed rather than concealment. It worked within the parameters they had planned for. They extracted the neurotoxin and delivered it to Haynes. Haynes was satisfied. Then Haynes wanted one more thing. The debrief meeting at the courts center was supposed to be a transfer, the crew delivering what they had produced and being released from the working arrangement. It became, instead, a multi-faction collision, Haynes attempting to have Michael arrested, a second FIB team investigating Haynes from inside the bureau, an IAA response that had been tracking the neurotoxin, and a Merryweather security presence that had been called in by someone. Trevor arrived. The court's center situation resolved itself in the specific way that situations resolve when Trevor arrives at them already in motion. They extracted. Haynes survived. Norton survived. The arrangement remained officially intact, which meant the monthly payments to Norton continued and the false identity remained secure, while the practical working relationship with Haynes had entered a phase that everyone understood could not be sustained much longer. The Union Depository was not a distant plan at this point. It was the next job. The family came back in the way that things come back when enough time has passed and enough of the reasons for leaving have been at least partially addressed, and the alternative to coming back is not better than what you left. Amanda returned. Tracy returned. Jimmy was already there, having never left in the specific way that Jimmy does not leave things. He drifts toward what is familiar, and the DeSanta house in Rockford Hills was the most familiar available thing. Michael was in the house when they came back. He did not stage the return. He did not plan what he would say or position himself for the moment of it. He was just in the house, doing something ordinary, and then they were there. They did not have the conversation that would resolve everything, because there is no such conversation available to people with their history. What they had was a series of smaller conversations and a series of shared spaces and a series of ordinary activities conducted in each other's presence, which is not resolution, but is its own kind of accumulation. He took Jimmy jet skiing. This was Jimmy's idea, or something that emerged from a conversation without a clear first mover, and they went and they were on the water together for an afternoon, and nothing was fixed, and they did not need anything to be fixed. They were just there. He attended a Tracy performance. He attended the entire performance, front to back, without ending it early, without doing anything that would require a phone call or an apology or the specific kind of explanation that begins, "I was trying to help." He sat in the seat and watched, and at the end he told her it was good and meant a version of it. He and Amanda were not reconciled in any clean or completed sense. They were two people who had been married for 20 years through circumstances that had included armed robbery, fabricated death, relocation, affairs on both sides, a therapist who was using their sessions as research, and a son whose room smelled of marijuana, and a daughter who kept ending up in situations. What came back when the family came back was not the absence of all of that. It was the presence again of the original thing, the thing that had started in a strip club in the early 1990s when Michael won Amanda's attention despite her initial interest in someone else, and that had not gone away despite everything the subsequent years had offered as a reason for it too. The Meltdown premiere was a formal occasion. Solomon had arranged it at the Oriental Theatre on Vinewood Boulevard, the kind of premiere that marks a production's arrival as a real thing rather than a work in progress. Red carpet, press, an audience that included representatives from every part of the industry that cared about what Richards Majestic was doing with this production. Michael bought a tuxedo from Ponsonby's. He found the purchase slightly absurd and also, in a way he did not examine too carefully, satisfying. He had been to Vinewood events before, in the years of the Western car jobs, in the period of establishing the Solomon relationship, but not as the associate producer of the film being premiered. Jimmy called to confirm his invitation and in the same conversation to discuss his feelings about formal wear. Michael handled this conversation with more patience than it required. The family attended together. The theatre was full in the way that successful premieres are full, not just with seats occupied, but with the specific energy of a room full of people who have either seen the film already and are here to be associated with its success, or who have not seen it and are here to determine whether they should be associated with its success. Solomon was at the door. He greeted the family with the warmth of someone who had made a genuine connection during the production period and did not perform warmth as a professional tool. Laszlo was working the red carpet and identified Michael and Jimmy approaching with sufficient advance notice to relocate. The relocation was brisk. The screening proceeded. Michael sat in the theatre and watched Solomon Richards' film play out on the screen with the specific quality of someone watching something they had a hand in making, not the passive reception of a pure audience member, but the particular attention of a person tracking the gap between intention and result. Devin Weston appeared in the lobby during the intermission. He was not there to watch the film. He was there to deliver a specific piece of information at a moment when it would have maximum effect, and he delivered it with the specific elegance of someone who has had a great deal of practice at saying terrible things in pleasant tones. He told Michael his family was being taken care of. Michael understood the phrase. He left the theatre and drove back to Rockford Hills at a speed that Los Santos traffic law did not accommodate. He was processing during the drive not what Weston had said, but what Weston had done, because what Weston had said was the thing that indicated what Weston had done, and what Weston had done was send armed people to the house with his family in it. He was right. Merryweather security operatives, private military, well-equipped, deployed with the specific professionalism of people who do this as a job rather than as a reaction, were inside the Rockford Hills house. Amanda and Tracy were in the house. The operatives were between the family and any available exit. Michael went through the house. He worked from the entry point through the ground floor in the sequence that clearing a building requires when you are doing it alone, and when the priority is the people inside who are not armed, which changes the sequence significantly from clearing a building where the priority is the armed people. He moved fast in the spaces where speed was the correct variable, and carefully in the spaces where speed would announce his position. He found guards. He dealt with them in the specific way that Michael deals with things that are in his way when his family is behind them. He found Amanda. He found Tracy. He moved them toward the exit. One of the surviving operatives got behind him. The blow came before he could process the angle it came from, which is what happens in buildings when you are not covering every direction simultaneously, which no one can do alone. He went down. Jimmy was outside. He had come to the house from another direction, had seen the operatives' vehicles, had not gone inside, and had been positioning himself outside with the limited available tools and the specific determination of someone who does not have many options but is committed to using the ones they have. When the operative moved toward the family, Jimmy created a situation that gave Michael enough of a window to recover it. The operative was dealt with. Michael got his family out of the house and moved them to a location that Weston's people did not have a record of. He called Lester from Del Perro Pier the following morning, standing at the edge of the water in the early light with the city behind him and the Pacific in front of him. He told Lester that Weston had sent people to the house. He told Lester they were doing the depository. Lester had two approaches ready. The subtle approach used Securicars and uniform impersonation, intercept the vehicles scheduled to collect the gold from the underground vault, take the guards' uniforms and credentials, process through the depository's security as a legitimate armored car crew, load the gold on carts, drive away. The depository's systems would process them as routine. No alarm would trigger because nothing would appear to be wrong. The obvious approach was built around noise and speed, a distraction at the front of the building while Franklin drilled through the vault floor from below, with Trevor lifting the gold out by helicopter in a window calculated around the police response time. The heist required crew. Lester had a roster available at various experience levels and various costs, and the difference in take between optimal and suboptimal crew selection ran into the tens of millions of dollars. Michael reviewed the roster with the same attention he had brought to every crew decision since his first job, methodically, without sentiment, with the understanding that a wrong choice here had a quantifiable consequence. They selected, they prepared, they ran the setups, the vehicle acquisitions, the equipment staging, the positioning of crew members in their starting locations. On the day, the Union Depository vault opened. The gold inside amounted to approximately $201 million, the precise figure varying slightly between the approaches and the crew quality, but in all scenarios well above anything Michael, Trevor, Franklin or Lester had touched in their combined careers. They collected it, they exited, they evaded, they gathered at the distribution point with more money than any of them had individually held a claim to at any previous moment in their lives. Lester did the math. The cuts were distributed per the agreed percentages. Even the bottom of the cascade, the individual crew members at the lowest competence tier, received more than most people see in a decade of ordinary employment. Franklin went home. Two people were waiting for him. Steve Haynes arrived at Franklin's Vinewood Hills property with the specific energy of a man who has decided that a problem has to be ended and has made an assessment of how to end it. He had been managing the situation with the crew, the coerced operations, the neurotoxin, the ongoing exposure that Trevor Philips represented to the entire structure of what Haynes had built on the back of the Humane Labs work for long enough that the management was costing him more than the benefits were providing. Trevor was the specific liability. Too volatile, too unpredictable, too capable of generating situations that could not be contained by the kind of institutional pressure that kept Michael cooperative. He needed Trevor gone. He presented this to Franklin as an instruction rather than a request, with the implicit clarity about what Haynes' position allowed him to do if Franklin declined. Devin Weston came after Haynes had left. He sat in the living room of a house he had found through resources that cost him nothing meaningful to deploy, and communicated his position with the same pleasant brutality he brought to all of his professional communications. He wanted Michael DeSanta dead. The specific charges, interference with the meltdown insurance resolution, the indirect causation of Molly Schultz's death, the cumulative cost of Michael's involvement in a series of situations that had not gone as Weston had planned them. He was offering Franklin a way to settle this cleanly. He was implying, without making it explicit, what the alternative looked like. Franklin sat in the house after Weston left. He had been given 2 instructions that required him to destroy the 2 people in his life who represented something that his previous life had not offered him, a view of what he could actually become and the evidence of what genuine commitment looked like, even when genuine commitment was applied to things that reasonable people would object to. Michael had shown him the first thing. Trevor had demonstrated the second, in his own register and with his own particular vocabulary, but with a consistency and a completeness that was its own form of instruction. He called Lester. Lester listened to the situation in full. He was quiet for a period. Then he proposed a plan that required setting specific conditions in which every remaining threat could be drawn to a single point and addressed simultaneously. The mechanism, the Union Depository gold, needed to be melted down. The official trail from the heist had to be eliminated. This was true, and it was also the correct framing to use with people who had surveillance on the crew, because it would be monitored, and the people monitoring it would interpret melt the gold at the foundry as the crew destroying their own evidence and would send teams to intercept them there, Haynes with an FIB response, Weston with Merriweather. They would both be sending resources to the same location. Lester specified a foundry in a part of the city that had the geography for what they were planning, enough interior space to operate in, enough exterior space for the engagement that would happen before they got inside. He specified a time window based on how long institutional surveillance took to organize a response team and get it to a location. Franklin called Lamar Davis. Lamar's answer to being called by Franklin for something serious has always been the same answer: yes. The specifics of the situation are not the first question. The question of whether he is available is not even a question. He shows up. Franklin called Trevor. Trevor was in a specific state. He had accepted the apology from Michael, privately, in a conversation that neither man has described in any available account, but whose outcome is documented in the texture of how they operated together in the events that followed. The acceptance was not the erasure of the North Yankton situation. It was not forgiveness in the sense of making the situation as though it had not occurred. It was the decision made by Trevor in the specific way that Trevor makes decisions, completely without half measures, that the account between them was not going to be settled by adding more to it. He drove to the foundry, Michael drove to the foundry, all 4 of them arrived within the window that Lester had calculated. The FIB strike team materialized from the north as anticipated. Merriweather's response came from the east. What followed was a sustained engagement inside and around the foundry between 4 people operating together in the same direction and 2 organized institutional responses that had anticipated a smaller and less capable opposition. The engagement went the way it went because of the specific capabilities that each of the 4 people brought to it. Lester, outside the building, managing the information flow in real time, telling them where the next units were before the units arrived. Franklin holding position on the ground with the specific physical competence and tactical reading of environments that had been his most reliable quality since Michael first identified it. Trevor working his side of the building with the completeness and the total commitment that made him, in situations with a clear objective, more effective than any single person should be. Michael working the other side with the calm and the precision and the attention to the sequence of objectives that had been his signature since 1988. When the foundry was clear, Lester confirmed the remaining targets and their locations. Trevor went for Steve Haynes. Haynes was live on a Weasel News broadcast, a segment on organized crime, with Haynes as the expert guest, commenting with the smooth authority of a senior federal agent on the threat that organized crime networks posed to public order. The segment was being recorded at a Weasel News location that Lester had identified. Trevor arrived at this location. The broadcast ended before its scheduled conclusion. Michael went for Harold Joseph, known as Stretch, a ballast figure who had been involved in multiple situations involving Franklin's safety over the years, including at least one deliberate arrangement designed to get Franklin killed. Michael found him at a basketball court and handled the situation with an economy of action that reflected decades of experience at making permanent decisions cleanly. Franklin went for Wei Cheng. Cheng had been running his triad operations in Los Santos from a position of apparent untouchability, the assumption that sufficient distance from any individual criminal act provided safety from accountability. Franklin found him and brought that assumption to an end. Trevor went to Devin Weston's estate. The estate was protected. Weston maintained a Merryweather detail at the residential level. The same company he had deployed to the DeSanta house now deployed around his own. Trevor worked through the detail with the specific patience and effectiveness of a man who has a clear objective and is willing to do everything necessary to reach it. He extracted Weston from the estate alive. This was intentional. Weston was in the trunk of a car. They met at a cliff top above the Pacific Ocean, south of the city. The city was visible from there. The grid of lights in the dark, the skyline, the entire surface of Los Santos arranged below them like a Solomon Richards establishing shot. Franklin and Michael were already there when Trevor pulled up. Through the trunk lid, sounds confirmed Weston was present and awake. Michael stood by the car. He had not written a speech. He was not a man who prepares speeches, but the thoughts that came out in that cliff-top dark had a coherence to them that surprised even Michael, which suggests they had been forming for a long time in the background of everything else he had been doing. He spoke to the closed trunk in a level voice, looking at the metal of the car rather than the ocean or the city, and what he said came out clean. He talked about outsourcing, about the way Weston had built a career out of removing himself from the direct consequence of every decision, always the entity behind the entity, always the investor in the operator rather than the operator, always the person who gave the instruction rather than the person who carried it out. The distance was the point. The distance was designed to produce the specific form of deniability that Weston had leveraged his entire career. It had made him rich. It had not made him untouchable. It had only made him delayed. He talked about scale, about the specific belief which Weston shared with a particular category of wealthy person that accumulation past a certain threshold produces a different category of person, one for whom the rules that govern everyone else are a service extended to those who have not yet earned the exemption. Weston had operated for decades inside this belief. He had sent mercenaries to a residential house in Rockford Hills because he had the resources to send mercenaries, and because the belief told him that having those resources was sufficient justification for deploying them. The belief was wrong. Weston had just spent an evening in a car trunk learning why. Weston had tried to kill his family, had tried to destroy Solomon Richards's production, a man who had been making films with honesty and craft for 40 years, with no claim on Weston's insurance payout except that his work happened to be in the way of it, had operated his entire professional life on the assumption that being large enough made him unreachable. Michael told him to keep his problems out of America. Trevor expressed agreement in the clear, unambiguous way that Trevor agrees with things he actually believes. Franklin added what he wanted to add. They pushed the car off the cliff. It fell through the dark for long enough that you could follow it visually, a shape descending against the sound of the ocean below. When it hit the water, the explosion was immediate, a pulse of orange light at the base of the cliff, and then the sound of it reaching them a second later, and then the Pacific settling over what remained with the indifference that large bodies of water bring to all human conclusions. The three of them stood at the edge without moving for a moment. Michael said, to Trevor specifically, and without preamble, that he was getting too old for this nonsense. Trevor turned the statement over. He looked at it from several angles. The way Trevor looks at things he is deciding whether to take seriously. He did not disagree. The aftermath of the Deathwish came without ceremony. Dave Norton called. He communicated an expectation of continued discretion and continued good behavior. Michael said something appropriate and non-committal and ended the call. Solomon Richards called. He opened with a line from Arthur Penny's Sanatorium, the same film, the same character, the line that had travelled from a North Yankton drive-in screen through 30 years of bank robberies and a traffic cop's interview on Weasel News and Trevor's television in a Sandy Shores trailer to arrive here at the end of this particular sequence of events. Michael identified the film without hesitation. Solomon told him the meltdown numbers were extraordinary. He asked if Michael knew anyone who could fund their next project because certain financial relationships had been disrupted by recent events. Michael said he would look into it. Michael apologized to Trevor. He did it privately. The conversation is not on any public record, and neither man has described it in detail in any available account. What is known is the structure of what happened. Michael said what he needed to say, which included acknowledgement of the 2004 arrangement and its consequences, and Trevor received it in the way he had decided in advance to receive it. He declined the accompanying financial offer. He said the money was not the point. He said what the point actually was, and Michael acknowledged it, and they moved on in the specific way that two people move on from something when they have decided that moving on is more important than returning to it. They could see each other after that, not as though nothing had happened. The history does not dissolve, but with the weight of it at a level that is manageable and with the accumulated knowledge of two people who have been in the same room since 1985 and who are not, whatever else is true about the situation, going to stop being in each other's lives. By 2021, Michael DeSanta is at Richards Majestic Studios. Franklin Clinton, during a GTA Online mission that takes him through the studio lot, notes with casual affection that he hopes his producer contact is not working today, given what is about to happen around him. The tone of the note is the tone of someone checking on a friend rather than a former accomplice. An easy familiarity built on a history that included everything this story has described and that has survived it. Michael is not retired. He is not hiding. He's producing films at a studio in Vinewood under his own name, or at least the name he has been using for 2 decades, which is the same thing now. By 2025, he has been described in Vinewood industry contexts as a producer with a distinguished track record and a particular talent for the kind of films that Richards Majestic produces. He is in his late 50s. Amanda is still his wife. Their children have moved out and built their own versions of a life. Michael and Amanda are empty nesters in a Rockford Hills house that has finally enough people in it for its size to feel appropriate rather than excessive. He is, by most available measures, doing exactly what he said he wanted to do in 2004 when he made a deal with a young FIB agent who wanted to advance his career. The difference is that what he is doing with the retired life is different from what he imagined in 2004. He imagined the pool and the whiskey and the movies. He still has those things. He also has work that requires all of what he is and that does not require him to be anything else. The alignment between what a person is and what they are doing with their life is not always available. When it is available, it does not look the way people expect it to look when they are imagining it from the outside. It does not arrive with a resolution or a sense of completion. It arrives, if it arrives at all, as the quiet absence of a particular quality of friction, the friction of performing something that does not fit, day after day, for years. Michael DeSanta sits by the pool in Rockford Hills. The whiskey is there. The movies are on through the glass doors. The pool is still. He closes his eyes. He sleeps longer than 6 hours. That is the complete life of Michael Townley, who became Michael DeSanta, who built a retirement on a betrayal, who spent 9 years trying to stay inside it, who was found by a 6-word quote said to a traffic cop outside a jewelry store, who spent 8 months being pulled back into what he was, and who came out the other side of it with a production credit on a Vinewood film and a family that is still, despite everything, in the house. He is not a hero. Heroes do not trade their partner's safety for their own exit. Heroes do not spend 9 years maintaining a constructed fiction while the man they betrayed writes letters to a ghost and mourns a living friend. Heroes do not lie in the snow next to a man they helped put there and say things that are neither true nor false, but are only company. But the story of Michael DeSanta is not a story about heroism, and holding it to that standard is the wrong measurement. It is a story about a man who knew exactly what he was and spent most of his adult life at war with that knowledge, who tried to become something else. The good father, the quiet retiree, the man who watches movies and drinks whiskey and does not point guns at people, who failed at this not because he lacked will, but because you cannot become something else by renaming yourself and moving to a warmer city. The name Michael DeSanta did not contain a different person. It contained Michael Townley with a different address and a better pool. What resolved the war, or what reduced it to something manageable, was not a transformation, it was an alignment. The heists of Twintai 13 let him use what he was in the service of things that mattered to him, getting his family safe, settling accounts with people who deserved settling, producing a film by a man he had admired since North Yankton. The skills that had made him a criminal made him, in those months, something closer to the person he had been trying to describe to Friedlander from a leather chair in Pacific Bluffs for 3 years. Friedlander, it turns out, was using those sessions to write a book. The book was called Sociopath, Inside the Mind of America's Most Deluded Criminals. The character he called Marquis de Santos was recognizably Michael to anyone who knew Michael. Whether Michael ever read the book is not on any public record. Whether if he read it he recognized himself is a more interesting question and equally unresolved. What is resolved, or at least settled, which is different from resolved but is what is available, is the life as it stands in 2025, a house in Rockford Hills, Amanda in it, still, after everything that house has witnessed, the children grown, and in the world doing whatever they are doing, which is their business now, a production company that makes films, a phone relationship with a 78-year-old filmmaker who opens every call with a quote that Michael identifies before the other man finishes the sentence, and somewhere in the city, or somewhere outside it, in a charter flight to Blaine County, or at the controls of a seaplane, or standing in the middle of a situation that any reasonable person would leave, Trevor Philips is alive and continues to be Trevor Philips, which is the most Trevor Philips outcome of all of this, and also in some way that is hard to articulate but accurate, the outcome that Michael is most at peace with. He got out. He just did not get out of himself, and it turned out that was not actually the goal. The goal, the thing the pool and the whiskey and the 9 years of Friedlander and the Vinewood movies were gesturing toward without quite reaching, was not the absence of what Michael Townley was. It was the presence of something else alongside it, something that was also his. The work, the precision, the room full of people who needed directing, and the plan that held the room together. He found that in Solomon Richards' office at Backlot City, in the specific conversation between two men who had been watching the same films since before they had any reason to be in the same place, he found the version of himself that could exist in Los Santos without lying about what he was, not because that version was innocent, but because it was real. He is in his late 50s now, by most reasonable calculations. The pool is still in Rockford Hills, the whiskey is still cold in the afternoons, but the sky he is watching when he lies by it is different sky than it was in 2013, Not literally, the Pacific weather over Los Santos does not change that dramatically, but different in the sense that the man looking at it is not looking for an exit from himself anymore. He is, as much as this word applies to someone with his history, home. And it turned out that was enough. If this kind of storytelling is what you come here for, slow, detailed, built from the actual lore of these worlds, designed to carry you somewhere quiet while giving you something real to follow, a subscription means you hear what comes next. One tap, no cost, and when the next story goes live, you will already be there waiting for it. The story of the other one is coming. The man who ran from Ludendorff on foot into the North Yankton winter and found his way to a Sandy Shores trailer and spent 9 years building an empire out of chemistry and violence and a very specific code of personal honor that most people cannot follow, but that Trevor followed with complete consistency. The man who dug up a grave with his bare hands, who drove to Los Santos when he heard 6 words on the news and knew exactly who had said them. That story is longer and louder and ends in fire. The partnership that started on a North Yankton airstrip in 1985 when 2 young men vomited together over something they had just done and decided on that basis that they understood each other. That partnership produced Michael DeSanta and Trevor Philips and the story of 2013, and it is not finished. There is another chapter, and it belongs to the other man. Find it when you are ready. Rest now.